The courtroom was silent, but the tension was palpable. Ethan stood at the center of it, feeling smaller than ever in the oversized suit that didn't quite fit his lanky frame. The judge, a man with deep creases etched into his face from years of life and law, peered down at him through his thick glasses, his expression unreadable. Ethan's palms were clammy, his heart thumping loudly in his chest. The courtroom felt suffocating, the walls closing in around him. Ethan could feel the eyes of the jury and the spectators on him. They were all waiting for the moment when this teenage boy would falter, make a mistake, or, in the worst-case scenario, fail entirely. Mr. Williams, the judge's voice broke the silence, cold and commanding. You've heard the charges against you. And yet, here you are, standing before this court with nothing but your youth and a few nonsensical explanations. Do you honestly expect me to believe you didn't intentionally cause this mess? Ethan's throat tightened. The judge's words hit him like a punch. He had never imagined that being in court could be like this. He had only wanted to help, a simple programming error in the system of an app he'd been working on for a school project. But now, the mistake was being blown out of proportion, and here he was, facing legal charges that could ruin his future. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't trained in the law. He was just a teenager who'd gotten tangled up in something much bigger than he could handle. The murmurs of the gallery faded as the judge's voice boomed again, this time with an edge of sarcasm. Tell me, Mr. Williams, how is it that a high school student with no legal training can be so sure about the unintentional nature of his actions? Are you telling this court that you, with your, 15 years of life experience? The judge chuckled bitterly. Do you really think anyone here is going to take you seriously? Ethan's face burned with embarrassment. He could feel the judgment in every eye in the room, and it stung. The pressure mounted, and he could feel his hands trembling, despite his efforts to remain calm. His lawyer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Daniels, didn't seem much help either. Mr. Daniels had tried to reassure Ethan before the trial started, but he hadn't been able to do much more than offer a few half-hearted words of encouragement. As the trial went on, it was becoming clear that the lawyer wasn't doing much to defend him at all. But what could they expect? How could a teenager like Ethan possibly navigate a courtroom full of professionals? Your Honor, Ethan's voice cracked as he finally spoke. He had no idea what he was saying, but he had to say something. I didn't mean to. The judge waved a dismissive hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Save it, Mr. Williams. I've heard enough. This whole situation reeks of carelessness, and frankly, you don't have the credibility to back up your claims. You're just a kid, and you're in over your head. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no idea how he was supposed to defend himself against accusations that were spiraling out of control. This wasn't a high school debate or a classroom argument. This was real, and he was the one who was going to suffer for it. Your Honor, Ethan started again, but the judge's piercing gaze silenced him. Enough, the judge snapped, his voice full of disdain. I've seen enough cases like yours to know exactly how this ends. And mark my words, young man, this is not going to end well for you. Ethan felt the weight of the judge's words crush him. The hopelessness began to sink in. He wanted to argue, to explain how it all started with a simple mistake. But the judge wasn't listening. The whole room wasn't listening. They were all just waiting for him to fail. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He was about to speak again when a voice, smooth and confident, interrupted the courtroom's tense silence. If I may, Your Honor? The voice wasn't loud, but it carried a certain authority. Everyone in the room turned, their eyes flicking toward the figure standing at the back of the courtroom. The man was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and his presence commanded attention. His face was vaguely familiar, but Ethan couldn't quite place it. The judge narrowed his eyes. Who are you? The man smiled, walking forward with an easy confidence. I'm here to represent Mr. Williams, he said, his voice calm but firm. There was a murmur of surprise throughout the room. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And who exactly are you to think you can waltz into my courtroom and take over this case? The man paused, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, with a small smirk, he replied, My name is Elon Musk. The name hit Ethan like a thunderclap. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. The Elon Musk, the billionaire, the tech genius, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla? The one who had revolutionized the way people thought about technology? What on earth was he doing here, in a small courtroom for a case about a programming mistake? The judge looked stunned for a moment before regaining his composure. Elon Musk? You're telling me that Elon Musk, the CEO, is here to represent a high school student? Elon nodded, unfazed by the judge's incredulity. That's correct, Your Honor. I have more than enough experience with technology and legal matters to assist in this case. I believe Mr. Williams has been wrongfully accused, and I intend to prove that. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Everyone seemed to be trying to process what had just happened. Ethan was no exception. He was still in shock. The man who had changed the world with his innovations was standing right there, offering to defend him. But why? Why would Elon Musk care about a teenager like him? The judge seemed to hesitate before speaking again. I'll allow you to represent him, Mr. Musk. But don't think for 1 second that this is going to be easy. Elon smiled, his confidence unwavering. I'm not here to make it easy. I'm here to make it right. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since entering that courtroom, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to fight back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ethan Williams wasn't the type to attract attention. He was an average teenager, the kind that blended into the background at school and kept to himself. But despite his quiet demeanor, Ethan had always felt different, like there was something more to him than just being a student. He had always been drawn to computers, the way they worked, and the mysteries hidden within code. Where others saw just a screen, Ethan saw endless possibilities. He had started programming when he was just 12, tinkering with lines of code late at night when his mom thought he was doing his homework. His mother, Clara Williams, had always been his biggest supporter. Clara was a kind-hearted woman, a single mother who worked tirelessly as a nurse to make ends meet. She was all Ethan had. His father had left when he was just a baby, and Clara had raised him on her own, always encouraging him to follow his dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. She was the one who had bought him his first laptop, the one that sparked his passion for coding. She believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Despite his mother's unwavering faith, Ethan had always struggled with self-doubt. At school, he was far from popular. He wasn't one of the jocks, nor was he one of the cool kids. He was the kid who sat in the back of the classroom, his face buried in his laptop, lost in the world of algorithms and programming languages. He didn't fit in with the other students, and over time, that became a source of pain for him. He didn't mind the loneliness. He was used to it. But when the loneliness started to turn into ridicule, that was a different story. Ethan had been bullied, though not in the traditional sense. It wasn't the shoving in hallways or name-calling at lunch. It was subtler, more insidious. The whispers, the snickers when people saw him typing away on his laptop, the teasing over his awkwardness. Those things had begun to chip away at his confidence. But what hurt the most was when the teasing turned into indifference. People didn't even bother to make fun of him anymore. They just ignored him. And for a teenager, there was nothing more painful than being invisible. At home, things weren't much better. Clara did her best, but the stress of her job, the long hours, and the mounting bills left her exhausted, and Ethan knew it. He hated seeing his mom so worn out. They had always lived modestly, but the reality of their financial struggles was hitting harder than ever. Clara's health wasn't great either. She had been battling chronic back pain for years, and the long shifts at the hospital were only making it worse. Ethan had tried to help by picking up odd jobs and using his coding skills to do freelance work online. It wasn't much, but it helped a little. And yet, despite everything, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his life than this. More than just coding in his room, more than just the bleak school hallways, more than the quiet, repetitive days that seemed to stretch on endlessly. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to do something that would make people see him, not just as that quiet kid in the back of the class, but as someone who could make a real impact. It was those dreams that led him to create the app. It had started as a simple idea, a way to help local businesses streamline their scheduling systems. Ethan had spent weeks coding, pouring his heart and soul into it. The app was far from perfect, but he was proud of it. He pitched the idea to his mom, who was more excited than he had ever expected. She believed in him so much that she told him to show it to anyone who would listen. She wanted him to succeed. And so, Ethan had submitted it to an online startup competition. It was small, but it was a start. He had no idea that submitting his app would lead to this, being on trial for something he hadn't even meant to happen. The app had malfunctioned in a way that caused a major issue with a local business's scheduling system. It was supposed to streamline things, not break them. Ethan had been called in to fix the bug, but by the time he arrived, the damage had already been done. The business had lost money, and their reputation was on the line. A lawsuit quickly followed, and somehow, in the chaos, Ethan found himself as the focal point. The accusations were that Ethan had caused the app's malfunction intentionally, though the idea was preposterous. Why would a teenager with no ill will cause damage to a local business? But logic didn't matter in court. What mattered was that Ethan didn't have the resources, the connections, or the experience to fight this fight. He was up against a team of sharp, seasoned lawyers, and no one seemed to believe his side of the story. And then Elon Musk appeared. Ethan had been so caught up in his own despair that he hadn't even noticed when the man walked into the courtroom. The name Elon Musk had meant nothing to him at first, but when the man had revealed himself, the room had gone still. Every head had turned. Even the judge, who had been merciless just moments before, seemed taken aback. Why was Elon Musk here? What did he have to do with this case? And most importantly, why was he offering to help Ethan? It didn't make sense. Ethan had been so overwhelmed by the situation that he hadn't been able to process anything fully. But as the minutes ticked by and he listened to Musk's calm, calculated responses to the judge, something inside Ethan stirred, a flicker of hope. Could this truly be happening? Could the man who had built rockets and revolutionized the car industry be here to help him? It seemed impossible. But then again, nothing about Ethan's life had ever followed a traditional path. And maybe, just maybe, this was his moment. His chance to prove that he wasn't just some kid in the back of the class. He didn't know where this would go, or how it would end. But one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to let the judge's mocking words define him. Not anymore. As he glanced over at Elon Musk, who was sitting confidently at the defense table, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He was going to fight this. He was going to prove that he deserved to be seen. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Elon Musk took his seat at the defense table, his presence shifting the energy in the room. The judge, though still skeptical, had granted him permission to represent Ethan. Everyone in the gallery seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting for the next move in this unexpected twist of fate. Ethan sat there, feeling a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. His world had just turned upside down, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't sure whether to be terrified or hopeful. Elon leaned over and spoke quietly to Ethan, his voice low but steady. "We're going to make this right, kid. You've got a lot of potential, and I'm here to make sure that nothing derails your future." Ethan nodded, though his mind was spinning. "But how can you help me? I'm just a kid. This whole thing is bigger than I can handle." Elon gave him a reassuring smile. "Sometimes, the best people to solve big problems are the ones who see things differently. You're not just a kid, Ethan. You're someone with talent. Don't let them make you feel small." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. Here he was, a teenager who had been mocked just moments before, now being comforted by one of the most influential people in the world. It didn't make sense, but for the first time, he felt like he had someone in his corner, someone who believed in him, even when the rest of the room was ready to dismiss him. The trial continued, with Ethan's heart racing as Elon began to speak on his behalf. The judge seemed reluctant but allowed him to continue, his skepticism growing with every word Elon spoke. Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, here to represent a high school student in a tech-related case? The judge's voice dripped with incredulity. "Are you truly suggesting that Mr. Williams is anything more than a clueless teenager who made a mistake?" Elon didn't flinch. He was unfazed, his tone calm yet sharp. Mistakes happen. We've all made them, especially when we're trying something new. But that doesn't mean a person should be penalized for their ambition. Ethan didn't intend for anything bad to happen. This was a simple programming error that snowballed. And the system he built, though flawed, has potential. The goal was always to help, not to harm. Ethan couldn't help but feel a slight shift in the atmosphere. There were whispers, nods of acknowledgement from some of the jurors, and even a small expression of surprise from the judge. Elon had a way of making complex ideas sound simple, of presenting the truth in a way that was hard to argue with. It was clear that the man wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a brilliant strategist, able to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter. Still, there were those who weren't convinced. The opposing attorney, a sharp and experienced lawyer named Gregory Hart, was quick to strike back. "Mr. Musk, you're trying to defend the indefensible. Mr. Williams here might have been trying to help, but that doesn't change the fact that his app caused damage. A local business lost significant revenue. And now we're supposed to believe that a high school student with no real-world experience can build a system that's not only functional but also free from faults? Please." Elon raised an eyebrow. "I'm not suggesting the system was perfect. I'm suggesting that the intent behind it was never malicious. Mr. Williams may be young, but his ideas are far more advanced than anyone gives him credit for. The truth is, people are too quick to judge someone by their age instead of their capabilities." Gregory Hart scoffed, clearly not impressed. "Age has nothing to do with this. The fact remains that Mr. Williams created a system that failed. And that failure cost real money, real damage." The tension in the room grew thicker. Ethan could feel the weight of the accusations pressing down on him again, his earlier sense of hope waning for a moment. Would anyone ever really believe him? Would anyone care about his side of the story? But Elon wasn't backing down. He stood tall, his eyes fixed on the judge, his voice steady and confident. The system failed because it was new. It was an experimental project, just like so many successful ideas we see in the world today. When Tesla first launched electric cars, they weren't perfect. When SpaceX first tried to land a rocket, it didn't always work. But those mistakes didn't stop us from trying again. Ethan deserves that same chance. For the first time, the judge seemed to soften slightly, a small flicker of understanding passing across his face. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. He glanced at the jury, who appeared to be taking in Elon's words with more seriousness than they had shown before. Ethan wasn't sure how it had happened, but slowly, the tide seemed to be turning. Maybe Elon Musk wasn't just defending him. Maybe he was giving him a chance to prove that he wasn't just a mistake waiting to happen, but someone who could make a difference. But as much as the defense was making progress, the battle wasn't over. Gregory Hart wasn't ready to let go of his stance. He was a skilled lawyer, and he wasn't going to back down just because Elon Musk had walked into the room. "Let's not get distracted by these lofty ideals, Mr. Musk," Hart said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The reality is that Mr. Williams is responsible for the damage, and he should be held accountable, no matter how promising his potential might be." The judge nodded slowly. "I'll allow both sides to continue presenting their cases. We'll reconvene tomorrow." As the gavel struck and the courtroom slowly emptied, Ethan felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of him felt relief. Elon had given him a voice when no one else would. But another part of him felt the weight of what was still ahead. The road to clearing his name wasn't going to be easy. The conflict had only just begun. As they walked out of the courtroom, Elon clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This isn't over, but we've got something to work with. You're not alone in this fight." Ethan looked up at the man beside him, still in awe. "Why are you doing this for me?" Elon's smile was small but genuine. "Sometimes, the right person shows up at the right time. You've got something valuable to offer, Ethan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan believed it. He wasn't alone. There was someone out there who saw him for more than just a mistake. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger than he had ever dreamed. The next day, Ethan woke up to a heavy silence in the house. His mom had already left for her shift at the hospital, and the weight of the trial pressed down on him like a 1,000-pound burden. It was only his second day in the courtroom, and the weight of it all was already wearing him thin. His heart raced with anxiety as he sat in the kitchen, staring at a half-eaten bowl of cereal. His mind was consumed with the thoughts of what the next phase of the trial would bring. Elon had assured him that the next day would be crucial. They needed to prove that Ethan's intentions had always been pure, that the mistake was unintentional and the result of a genuine error. But the challenge was clear. In a world where success was often measured by results, a mistake, especially one with consequences, was a hard pill to swallow. Ethan closed his eyes and remembered what Elon had said the night before, after the court adjourned. "We're going to hit them with the facts, Ethan. We'll show them what your app was meant to do, and we'll prove that the error was just that, an error. You're not alone in this. You have the potential to change the world, and this is just a small setback." But setbacks were never easy, especially when the stakes were so high. Ethan didn't just have the pressure of defending himself in a courtroom full of seasoned professionals. He had the weight of his mother's hopes on his shoulders. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when things were finally starting to feel like they might be different. As the day of the trial began, Ethan and Elon walked into the courthouse, the usual murmurs and whispers from the crowd swelling around them. Ethan's nerves were a storm inside him, a swirling mess of doubt and uncertainty. His gaze flickered to Elon, who was his steady anchor, a figure of calm confidence. If Elon Musk could stand in front of a crowd and face down the world, maybe, just maybe, Ethan could do the same. The courtroom was packed again. The judge sat at the bench, his gavel poised, while Gregory Hart, the opposing lawyer, sat smugly across the aisle. His expression was one of cool detachment, the kind of confidence that came from years of experience in the field. He was not about to lose to a teenager, no matter how persuasive Elon Musk might be. The judge cleared his throat, signaling the start of the session. "We are here to continue deliberating on the case of Ethan Williams. Let's proceed with the defense. Mr. Musk, you may present your argument." Elon stood up, his movements purposeful and measured. He had done this before, many times over. But something about this case was different. It wasn't just a corporate dispute or a technological breakthrough. It was a young man's future on the line. Elon understood that. More than anyone, he understood the fragility of youth and the importance of giving people a chance. With a smooth, confident voice, Elon began. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is not about assigning blame where it is not due. This is about recognizing the truth, that mistakes happen, especially when someone is pushing boundaries. The truth is, Ethan Williams did not cause harm intentionally. What happened here was a flaw in a system that was still in development. Ethan is a young programmer, but his knowledge and abilities are far beyond his years. He has a vision, a passion for creating something that can help people." The room seemed to shift slightly, as if the jury and even the judge were taking a collective breath. For the first time, the defense wasn't just about the facts of the case. It was about Ethan's potential, his ability to learn from this experience and grow. Elon continued, his tone unwavering. "The app that Ethan developed was not perfect. There were glitches, yes, but they were not intentional. The real question here is, do we punish someone for their ambition, for trying to do something innovative? Or do we give them a chance to learn, to fix their mistake and grow from it?" Gregory Hart rose from his seat, shaking his head as if he had heard enough. "This is naive, Mr. Musk. You're asking us to overlook the damage caused. The business lost significant revenue because of Mr. Williams' mistake. There are consequences to failure, and Ethan Williams should be held accountable for his actions." Elon's eyes locked with Gregory's, and there was a quiet strength in his gaze. "I'm not asking for you to overlook the consequences, Mr. Hart. I'm asking you to understand that a mistake does not define a person, especially when they are young and still learning. This is about more than the money lost. This is about the future we're building, one where innovation is nurtured, not crushed." Ethan's heart raced as he listened, a spark of hope igniting within him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger, something that went beyond the courtroom. Elon wasn't just defending him as a client. He was defending the idea of potential, of giving young people the chance to learn from their mistakes and rise again. The judge, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke. "I hear what you're saying, Mr. Musk. And while I understand the importance of supporting young talent, we cannot ignore the consequences of Mr. Williams' actions. However, I'm willing to allow some leniency if the defense can provide substantial proof that the damages can be mitigated and that Mr. Williams is willing to take responsibility for his actions. Elon nodded. We are prepared to show that the damages can be minimized, Your Honor. Ethan is more than willing to make amends for his mistake. He's already taken steps to fix the issue, and he's learning from it. He is dedicated to ensuring that this doesn't happen again. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Very well. I'll allow you to present evidence of the steps Mr. Williams has taken to remedy the situation. But make no mistake, this case is far from over. The jury will be paying close attention. Ethan's mind was spinning. They had a chance. Maybe not a perfect one, but a chance to prove that he was more than his mistake. He glanced at Elon, who gave him a reassuring nod. We're not done yet, Elon whispered. This is just the beginning. As the trial resumed, Ethan's nerves settled slightly. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over something important. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but he wasn't facing them alone. He had Elon Musk by his side, and together, they were going to show the world that a mistake was just that, a mistake, and that a person's potential was far greater than the errors of their past. It was time for Ethan to rise above the mockery. It was time for him to prove that he had more to offer than anyone had ever given him credit for. The days following the trial's turning point felt like a blur. Ethan was both physically and emotionally drained from the ongoing legal battle. The hours spent in court felt like an eternity, each moment fraught with tension and uncertainty. But there was one thing that kept him grounded: Elon Musk's unshakable confidence. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like someone saw him as more than just a mistake or a lost cause. He felt like a person of potential, someone whose voice could matter, even if the world hadn't yet recognized it. As the courtroom reconvened for the next round of arguments, the air was thick with anticipation. Today was the day that would determine everything. Would the judge side with Ethan's defense, acknowledging his willingness to make amends and the undeniable promise of his talent? Or would the harsh weight of consequence fall upon him, marking him as nothing more than a cautionary tale? Ethan sat in his usual spot beside Elon, trying to steady his breath. His palms were sweaty, and the pit in his stomach seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. This was the emotional climax of his entire journey, the moment that would define his future. The judge, already seated at the bench, tapped his gavel and called the court to order. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice stern but measured. Elon stood up first, his presence commanding attention. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today not just to discuss the unfortunate malfunction of a young programmer's app. We are here to decide whether this young man, Ethan Williams, will be defined by his mistakes, or whether we will acknowledge the incredible promise he has to offer." The words were clear and deliberate, and the entire courtroom fell silent. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the weight of the moment sank in. He wasn't just a kid facing a lawsuit anymore. He was standing at the precipice of something far greater than he had ever imagined. Ethan's app, as we all know, had a glitch, a mistake. But that glitch does not define him. He is not a criminal. He is not a failure. What he is a young man with a passion for technology and innovation. A young man who made a mistake, but has taken every step to correct it. Elon paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "I'm not here to ask for sympathy for Ethan. I'm here to ask for something far more important: understanding. Understanding that when we encourage young talent, we give them the chance to learn and grow. We don't punish them for making an error in judgment, especially when that error was not intentional." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for the judge to speak. Ethan's mind raced, but Elon's steady presence helped to calm him. He knew that Elon wasn't just fighting for him. He was fighting for something much bigger, fighting for the idea that young people should be given the opportunity to fail, learn, and then rise again. Gregory Hart, the opposing attorney, stood up next, his expression unreadable. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I disagree. Ethan Williams is responsible for the damages caused by his actions. Intentions don't matter when the consequences are as severe as they have been. The business he impacted has faced real losses. Losses that can't be brushed aside by a plea for understanding. The words stung, but Ethan refused to let them break him. He had heard these arguments before, the accusations of being a naive, careless teenager who couldn't grasp the reality of the adult world. But he was different now. The way Elon had spoken to him, the way he had fought for him. Ethan was no longer the kid who felt invisible and small. He was a creator, a problem solver, a young man capable of so much more. The judge listened carefully to both sides before speaking, his voice measured and authoritative. I have heard both arguments, and I recognize the complexity of this case. On one hand, we have a young man who clearly did not intend for any harm to come from his actions. On the other, we have a business that has suffered real damages, and the law must recognize that reality as well. The question before us is not whether Ethan Williams made a mistake. He did, but whether that mistake should define his future. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The judge had acknowledged his mistake. He hadn't tried to sugarcoat it or diminish the consequences, but he hadn't dismissed him either. The judge continued, his tone softer than before. I also recognize that people, especially young people, deserve the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. And sometimes, the best way to show a person the impact of their actions is not through punishment, but through guidance and support. A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but it was quickly followed by a surge of anxiety. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would decide everything. Would the judge offer him that chance? Would he be allowed to prove himself? The judge paused, looking down at the case notes in front of him. Therefore, I am offering a resolution that I believe will both acknowledge the severity of the mistake and provide an opportunity for growth. Ethan held his breath. I am ruling that Ethan Williams will not face severe legal consequences. However, he will be required to compensate the business for the damages caused by his app. Additionally, Ethan will need to work under mentorship in the field of technology for a period of 1 year. This mentorship will provide him with the guidance he needs to refine his skills and ensure that his future projects are more successful. Ethan blinked, the shock of the verdict washing over him. He wasn't going to jail. He wasn't going to be labeled a failure. In fact, he had been given something better, a chance to prove himself, to grow, and to succeed. The courtroom was silent for a moment before the murmurs began. Some people in the gallery seemed disappointed with the judge's decision, while others appeared relieved. Gregory Hart stood with his arms crossed, clearly displeased, but there was nothing more he could do. Elon turned to Ethan, his expression one of quiet pride. You did it, kid. This is your chance. Ethan could hardly process it all. He looked around the courtroom, taking in the faces of the people who had judged him, who had mocked him, who had dismissed him. He wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was someone with a future that he could shape with his own hands. As they left the courthouse, Elon clapped Ethan on the back. I told you, you weren't alone in this. Now, let's get to work. The world has no idea what's coming. For the first time, Ethan believed him. The emotional roller coaster of the past weeks had been harrowing, but it had also shown him something that would stick with him forever. Mistakes were inevitable, but they didn't define you. What defined you was how you responded, how you learned, and how you moved forward. And Ethan Williams was ready to move forward. The days following the judge's ruling were both a relief and a challenge. Ethan had been given the second chance he desperately needed, but now he had to prove he was worthy of it. As part of the ruling, he would need to repay the business he had unintentionally harmed, but the real test was his 1-year mentorship in the tech industry. That's where the true weight of his future lay. He had a lot to learn, and now it was time to get to work. Elon Musk had made good on his promise. Ethan found himself at SpaceX's headquarters, a place he had only ever seen in documentaries or online videos. Standing there in front of one of the most innovative companies in the world, Ethan couldn't quite believe his luck. He had gone from facing ruin in a courtroom to standing on the threshold of opportunity. It felt surreal, like he was in a dream that he didn't want to wake up from. I know this is overwhelming, but you're here because you have something special, Ethan, Elon said as they walked through the sleek, futuristic halls of SpaceX. Now it's time to put that potential to good use. You're going to learn things here that will change the way you think about technology. But remember, this isn't just about knowledge. It's about character. It's about how you carry yourself and how you learn from every mistake. Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't just treading water. He was finally moving forward, and he was doing it in a place that could take him places he had only dreamed of. The first few days were a whirlwind. Elon had set him up with some of SpaceX's top engineers, who guided him through their current projects. They taught him about the intricacies of rocket design, the complexities of software development for aerospace technology, and even the logistics behind launching spacecraft. It was a crash course in advanced engineering, and though Ethan struggled to keep up at times, he was determined to prove himself. The learning curve was steep. He'd been a high school programmer with dreams of creating apps, but this was an entirely different world. The stakes were higher, the challenges more complex. But for every mistake he made, there was someone there to guide him, to help him understand why things didn't work the way he thought they would, and how to fix them. There were moments of frustration, when the code didn't compile, when the math didn't add up, or when his ideas seemed far too far-fetched for the team to consider. But through it all, there was one constant: Elon's belief in him. Even when Ethan doubted himself, Elon was there, reminding him that failure wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the next lesson. One afternoon, as they sat together in a conference room overlooking the launch pads, Elon turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You've been doing well," Elon said, "but I want you to take on a bigger project. Something that challenges you, forces you to step out of your comfort zone. You've got a lot of raw talent, but it's time to refine it." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you have in mind?" Elon smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "You're going to build something for us, a software solution that will help improve the efficiency of our satellite tracking system. It's a real-world problem, and we need something creative. Think you can handle it?" Ethan swallowed, his mind racing. A project for SpaceX? The very thought was daunting. But this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He had to seize it. "Absolutely," Ethan said, determination setting in. "I'll get to work right away." And so, the next phase of Ethan's journey began. It wasn't easy. The project was unlike anything he had ever done before. He spent hours in front of a computer screen, coding and debugging, pushing himself beyond what he thought was possible. There were moments when he wanted to quit, when the frustration felt too much to bear. But every time he considered giving up, he remembered the trial, the people who had doubted him, and the opportunity Elon had given him. With each passing day, the software began to take shape. Ethan started seeing the pieces come together. The systems he had built as a teenager were nothing like this. This was professional, real-world engineering, and he was making it happen. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely, Ethan made progress. He received feedback from the engineers, who were impressed with his creativity and persistence. Elon kept a close eye on his work, offering advice and encouragement when things got tough. Then, one day, the breakthrough came. Ethan had finally finished the prototype. It wasn't perfect. There were still bugs to fix and adjustments to be made. But it worked. It was functional, and the potential for improving the satellite tracking system was evident. Elon was the first to see it. He sat down in front of Ethan's computer, his eyes scanning the screen as the software ran through its paces. This is impressive, Ethan," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with a hint of pride. "You've done it. You've created something that could actually make a difference." Ethan felt a rush of pride and relief. The weight of the months of hard work, the frustration, the doubts, all of it melted away in that moment. He had done it. And more than that, he had proven to himself that he could overcome the challenges he faced, no matter how daunting they seemed. Elon turned to him, a serious expression on his face. "This is the kind of work that will define your future. You're not just building software, you're building a career. And I think this is just the beginning for you." Ethan couldn't help but grin. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your help." Elon smiled back. "You did all the hard work, Ethan. But remember, this is only the beginning. The world is full of problems waiting for people like you to solve them." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan believed it. He wasn't the kid who had been mocked in that courtroom anymore. He wasn't the teenager who had made a mistake. He was a creator, an innovator, someone with a future in the world of technology. As he walked out of SpaceX that day, a sense of purpose settled within him. The road to redemption wasn't easy, but it had been worth every step. He had found his place, not just in the tech world, but in a world that was willing to give him a chance. And Ethan Williams was determined to make the most of it. The journey had just begun. Ethan was riding high on the momentum of his success. The satellite tracking software was working, and SpaceX was impressed with his progress. Elon had been more than just a mentor. He'd been a guide, a source of wisdom, and a constant reminder that failure wasn't the end of the road. But just as he thought things were finally falling into place, Ethan's world hit a bump. A big one. It came in the form of an email. A short, to-the-point email from one of the senior engineers at SpaceX, outlining a flaw in Ethan's prototype. The software wasn't just a little off. It was failing to properly interface with one of their core systems. Worse, if it wasn't fixed soon, the satellite tracking project could be delayed by weeks. Elon had trusted him with this task, and now the results were not just unsatisfactory, they were critical. Ethan stared at the email, his heart sinking. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He had worked so hard, put in countless hours, and now his work was on the verge of causing significant delays. He had let down the team. He had let down Elon. His first instinct was to shut everything down, to quit, to walk away, and to pretend none of this had ever happened. But there was no escaping the truth. This was the nature of his journey. It was going to be full of setbacks, full of moments where things didn't go as planned. The question was, how was he going to respond? He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him as he walked through the halls of SpaceX, his mind racing with possible solutions. But nothing seemed to stick. Every time he thought he had a fix, another problem cropped up. He felt his confidence start to erode with every failed attempt. That's when he ran into Elon. The man had a knack for showing up when Ethan needed him the most. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Elon observed, his tone light but perceptive. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to admit failure. Not after everything he had been through to get here. But he had no choice. "It's the tracking software," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I thought it was ready, but there's a critical flaw. If we don't fix it soon, the whole project could be delayed. I don't know how to fix it. I've tried everything, and nothing works." Elon nodded, his face thoughtful. "You've hit a wall. It happens to all of us." Ethan stared at him, disbelief written across his face. "You don't understand, Elon. This could set the whole project back. It's all my fault." Elon raised an eyebrow. "It's not all your fault. The key is not to focus on the mistake, but on the solution. This is where the real learning happens, Ethan. You're going to hit roadblocks. We all do. But the important thing is how you move past them." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "How do I move past this? How do I fix it?" Elon smiled. "You need to take a step back. You've been so focused on finding a quick fix that you're missing the bigger picture. Let's go over it together. Sometimes, the best solutions come when you let your mind rest and approach the problem with fresh eyes." Ethan took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay, let's do it." For the next few hours, they worked together. Elon didn't just throw out solutions. He guided Ethan through the thought process, asking questions, offering advice, and challenging his assumptions. With Elon's help, Ethan was able to identify a small oversight he had made in his coding, a minor error that, when fixed, would allow the system to work seamlessly with the other components. As they tested the solution, Ethan could feel his heart race with anticipation. They ran the software again, and this time, it worked. The tracking system was up and running, and the interface was smooth. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a huge step forward. Elon turned to Ethan with a grin. "See? It wasn't about getting it right the first time. It was about persevering, learning from each failure, and refining your approach." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "I really thought I was done for this time, but you were right. Taking a step back helped me see the problem differently." Elon clapped him on the shoulder. "It's not the setbacks that define us, Ethan. It's how we handle them. And you've handled this one like a pro." In that moment, Ethan realized something important. This was the true nature of innovation. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about how you responded to them, how you adapted, and how you learned. The road wasn't going to be smooth. There would be more setbacks, more failures, more doubts. But there would also be breakthroughs, moments of success, and opportunities to grow. And Ethan was ready for it. He wasn't just going to get through this journey. He was going to thrive in it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, collaboration, and learning. With Elon's guidance, Ethan tackled more and more complex problems, each one pushing him further than he thought he could go. He began to see the world of technology in a new light, not just as a series of code and equations, but as a space filled with possibilities, waiting to be explored. He began to earn the respect of the engineers at SpaceX. They saw him as more than just a teenager trying to prove himself. They saw him as someone with real potential, someone who could one day contribute to the kind of innovations they were working on. But there was still one obstacle that lingered in the back of his mind: the trial, the judgment, the public ridicule he had faced in the courtroom. Though he had come a long way, a small part of him still carried the weight of those moments. He couldn't shake the feeling that people were still judging him for his past mistake, even as he worked hard to move beyond it. One evening, after a long day at SpaceX, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his room at the SpaceX dorms, scrolling through his phone. A news article caught his eye, a headline that made his stomach drop. Teenage tech genius sued over failed app. Will his career ever recover? The article was a reminder of the reputation he had been trying to escape. It stung, but it also fueled a fire within him. He wasn't going to let his past define him. He had come too far, and no matter how many setbacks he faced, no matter how many people doubted him, he was going to keep going. With a determined look in his eyes, Ethan threw the phone aside. The world had mocked him once, but now he was ready to prove them all wrong. He wasn't just going to rise above his mistakes. He was going to surpass them, to create something that would make the world take notice. And with Elon Musk as his mentor, he knew that anything was possible. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, Ethan believed in his ability to overcome whatever came his way. The weeks following his breakthrough with the satellite tracking system felt like a new chapter in Ethan's journey. Every challenge he faced seemed to lead to new lessons, new opportunities, and a deeper understanding of what he was capable of. But despite the strides he had made, something nagged at him. He still felt like he was living in the shadow of his past mistakes, as though every step forward was being measured against his previous failures. It wasn't until a late evening in the SpaceX cafeteria that Ethan met someone who would change his perspective entirely. He was sitting at a table, mindlessly scrolling through a few new coding problems, when a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" a woman asked. Ethan looked up to see a young woman, around his age, holding a tray of food. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she had the kind of confident, purposeful air that Ethan had come to associate with the engineers at SpaceX. There was something familiar about her, something that made Ethan feel like he already knew her. "Sure," he said, offering her a seat. The woman sat down, offering him a polite smile before digging into her meal. Ethan was about to go back to his work when she spoke again. "I've seen you around," she said, her voice casual but laced with curiosity. "You're the kid who's been working on that satellite tracking system, right? The one who almost got taken down in court." Ethan's stomach churned. He hated that people still saw him as the kid who messed up. The thought of the lawsuit, the judgment, the trial, it all felt so distant now. He wanted to move beyond it, but it was hard when everyone kept bringing it up. "Yeah, that's me," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone light. "I guess I'm still making up for it." She chuckled, seemingly unfazed by his self-deprecating comment. "Well, I don't know who they are, but I think you're doing pretty well." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Really? You don't think I'm just some failed teenager trying to get lucky?" "Nope," she said, shaking her head. "I've seen your work. You're good, and you're learning fast. And you're not afraid to ask for help, which is something a lot of people here could learn from." Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She didn't see him as a failure. Maybe there was more to this journey than he realized. "Thanks," he said, smiling shyly. "I've been lucky to have a good mentor." The woman paused for a moment before looking at him with a thoughtful expression. "Elon Musk, right? I've heard he's been really invested in your progress. You've got a pretty impressive mentor to have your back." Ethan's face lit up at the mention of Elon. Yeah, he's been incredible. It's not just the tech stuff. He's taught me so much about perseverance, about how to handle setbacks. It's been life-changing. Well, she said, I'm sure he's been a huge help, but you're the one doing the hard work. You're the one showing up every day, learning from your mistakes. That's what counts. Ethan felt a little embarrassed by the compliment. It wasn't that he didn't believe in his own growth, but sometimes it was hard to internalize it when everyone around him seemed to focus on his past mistakes. I guess I'm still getting used to this whole second chance thing, he said quietly, poking at his food. I mean, sometimes I wonder if people are just waiting for me to screw up again. The woman, whose name he learned was Maya, nodded empathetically. I get that. I've been there. People always expect you to fail after one big mistake. But the truth is, what really matters is what you do after the fall. It's how you get back up that counts. Ethan looked up at her, intrigued by her confidence. How did you get past it? Maya smiled, a bit of humor in her eyes. By realizing that other people's opinions don't define me. I used to be in a similar position, getting caught up in what people thought of me. But eventually, I realized that if I spent all my time worrying about what others thought, I'd never get anything done. So I just focused on the work. If the work is good, the rest will follow. Ethan absorbed her words, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't expected. Maya didn't know all the details of his past, but somehow, she seemed to understand the struggle that came with overcoming failure. She wasn't just offering him advice. She was giving him permission to let go of the fear that had been holding him back. You're right, Ethan said, a spark of determination lighting up inside him. It's time to stop worrying about what everyone else thinks. Exactly, Maya said with a grin. You've got a lot of potential, Ethan. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something shift inside of him. He wasn't the kid from the courtroom anymore. He wasn't the one whose app had failed. He was a creator, a learner, and someone who was capable of far more than anyone had ever given him credit for. As he finished his meal with Maya, talking about everything from coding to space exploration, Ethan realized that his journey wasn't just about redemption in the eyes of the public. It was about how he saw himself. Maya's words, and her unwavering belief in his abilities, had unlocked something in him. Over the next few weeks, Maya became a regular presence in Ethan's life. She wasn't just a fellow engineer at SpaceX. She was his sounding board, his friend, and his ally. Together, they tackled coding problems, discussed new tech trends, and even swapped stories about the obstacles they had each faced along the way. Maya was one of the few people who truly understood the pressures of being young in a field dominated by seasoned professionals. One day, after a particularly grueling session working on the satellite tracking system, Maya turned to Ethan with a mischievous grin. Hey, she said, you ever thought about presenting your work at the next SpaceX tech conference? You've got the skills, and I think people would be impressed. Ethan stared at her, taken aback. Wait, you mean like presenting in front of an audience? I don't know if I'm ready for that. You've got this, she said with a wink. You're ready. You've learned so much, and you're doing incredible work. People need to see that. Ethan's stomach twisted at the thought. The idea of speaking in front of a crowd was terrifying. But Maya was right. He was ready. It wasn't just about showing his work. It was about proving to himself that he could stand on his own, that he had something to offer to the world of tech. Okay, he said, a small smile creeping onto his face. I'll do it. I'll present. As he walked away from the conversation, Ethan felt a wave of excitement and nerves mixed together. The road ahead was still filled with challenges. There were still obstacles to overcome, still doubts to face, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was truly on the path to something great. He wasn't just the kid who had been mocked in court anymore. He was a creator, an innovator, and he was about to prove it to the world. The stage was set. The idea of speaking at the upcoming SpaceX tech conference seemed more daunting every day. Ethan had never presented in front of a crowd before, let alone in front of some of the brightest minds in the tech world. But as the date of the conference drew nearer, the excitement began to outweigh the fear. Maya had been relentless in her encouragement. She helped Ethan prepare, coaching him on how to structure his presentation, how to explain complex ideas clearly, and how to stay calm under pressure. Despite his initial hesitation, Ethan started to realize that this could be his chance to finally prove to everyone, not just SpaceX, but to himself, that he was more than his past mistakes. He was an innovator, a creator, and this was his time. The day of the conference arrived, and Ethan could feel his heart pounding as he stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at the vast auditorium filled with people. There were engineers, developers, investors, and even media representatives from major tech publications. They had all come to hear the latest breakthroughs, the newest developments. And one of those developments was his own work, the satellite tracking system that had taken months of trial and error to perfect. Elon Musk was there too, sitting front and center, his face calm and focused, as always. But for some reason, today his presence felt different. Ethan didn't just want to impress Elon. He wanted to impress everyone in that room. He wanted them to see the same potential that Elon had seen in him. "You've got this," Maya said, giving him a reassuring pat on the back as she stood beside him backstage. "Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about sharing your journey. Let them see who you are and what you've learned." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thanks, Maya. I really appreciate everything." "No problem. You've earned this," she replied with a wink. "Now go show them what you can do." As Ethan stepped onto the stage, a wave of nerves hit him. The spotlight felt hotter than he expected, and the hum of conversation from the audience faded into a deafening silence. His palms were sweaty, and his heart was racing in his chest. But he had worked for this moment. He had earned it. He took a moment to steady himself, gripping the podium with both hands. The crowd's eyes were all on him, and for the first time, instead of feeling overwhelmed, Ethan felt a surge of clarity. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady but louder than he had expected. "I'm Ethan Williams, and today I'm here to talk about how a simple idea, when nurtured with determination, can lead to something far greater than expected." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Ethan wasn't just presenting a product. He was sharing his story, and in doing so, he was telling them about resilience, the ability to fail, to fall, and then to rise again. "As some of you might know," Ethan continued, "I'm here because I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and the consequences were severe. But I was given a second chance, and I was lucky enough to work alongside the brilliant minds here at SpaceX. What I've learned in the last few months is that failure isn't just a setback. It's a lesson. And with the right mindset, it can be the foundation for success." The crowd was silent, and Ethan could feel their curiosity building. This wasn't the typical presentation. Most of the engineers and developers were used to hearing about cold, hard data, the mechanics of software or rockets. But here was this young kid, standing before them, sharing his personal growth. His journey was raw, real, and relatable. It was a story they could connect to. He moved on to discuss the satellite tracking system, detailing the challenges he had faced and the breakthroughs that had made the project possible. He showed how a single mistake in the code had led to hours of frustration, but how collaboration and persistence ultimately allowed him to find a solution. "Every challenge," Ethan said, "taught me something new. I learned the value of teamwork, of asking questions, and of never giving up, even when it felt impossible." As he spoke, Ethan could see the reactions in the audience. Engineers exchanged knowing glances. They respected the process, the hard work, the failure, and the perseverance that had led to this moment. They weren't just impressed by the technology, though it was impressive. They were impressed by the person behind it. When the time came for questions, a hand shot up in the crowd. It was an older man, wearing a crisp suit and glasses. He looked familiar, someone high up in SpaceX's leadership. "Ethan," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "you've shown great growth in a short time. But what I'm curious about is how you plan to take this further. You've overcome the technical challenges, but what's next for you? What's the bigger vision here?" Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. He hadn't really thought about it in such a big-picture sense. All he had focused on was improving, learning, and proving that he could make it. But now, facing this question, it felt like a pivotal moment. He smiled, standing a little taller. "The bigger vision? It's about using what I've learned to solve bigger problems. To take the lessons from this satellite tracking system and apply them to other fields, like climate change, resource management, even space exploration. Technology has the power to change the world, and I want to be a part of that change. The crowd was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. Then, to his surprise, the older man nodded approvingly. "Impressive," he said. "I think you're on the right track, Ethan. Keep pushing the boundaries. We'll be watching." As Ethan finished the presentation, the applause that followed felt different from anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine recognition. Ethan had done something real, something important. He had shared his story and his work, and in doing so, he had gained the respect of his peers. When the conference ended, Elon Musk approached him backstage, his expression thoughtful. "You did well today," Elon said, his voice calm but sincere. "You didn't just present technology, you presented yourself. That's what people will remember." Ethan smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Thanks, Elon. I really appreciate it." "You're welcome. But remember," Elon added with a knowing smile, "this is just the beginning. There's a whole world out there waiting for you to make an impact. Don't stop now." As Ethan walked out of the conference hall, his heart felt lighter. He had done it. He had taken the first real step toward proving to the world, and to himself, that he wasn't just a kid with a mistake. He was a force to be reckoned with. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more failures, more setbacks. But now, for the first time, Ethan was ready for them. And he wasn't walking that road alone. He had allies, mentors, and friends who believed in him. And with that support, he was ready to take on whatever came next. The journey was far from over. But as Ethan stepped into the future, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the person he used to be. He was someone who had learned from his mistakes, someone who was capable of greatness. And the world was waiting to see what he would do next. Ethan's nerves from the tech conference still hadn't fully faded, but a new sense of purpose filled him. He had presented his work, overcome his fears, and earned respect. Now, as he returned to SpaceX, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. He had proven himself on the stage, but the real test was what came next. The days after the conference passed in a blur of emails, meetings, and new projects. Ethan was thrust into a series of brainstorming sessions with the other engineers, all focused on ways to improve SpaceX's current missions. But amid all the excitement, something was brewing, a challenge, one that would stretch Ethan's skills and force him to confront his past once more. It was a Thursday morning when Ethan received the unexpected call. "Ethan, we need you in the conference room," Maya's voice crackled over the phone. "There's something urgent that we need to talk about." His heart skipped a beat. Maya's voice always had a certain edge when something was serious. Ethan grabbed his laptop and rushed to the conference room, his mind racing with possibilities. What could this be about? When he entered, the room was filled with a mix of engineers and high-ranking officials from SpaceX, including a few faces he didn't recognize. Elon Musk was standing near the front of the room, his usual calm expression giving nothing away. Ethan took a seat, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. Maya gave him a quick, supportive glance before turning her attention to the group. "Elon," Maya said, addressing him directly, "why don't you explain it to Ethan?" Elon nodded, his eyes meeting Ethan's. "We've been facing a challenge with our upcoming Mars mission," he began, his tone measured. "The data we've been receiving from our satellites has been inconsistent, and we suspect interference in our tracking systems. We need someone who can look at it from a fresh perspective, someone with a strong understanding of both tech and space systems, someone who can create a more reliable tracking system." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The Mars mission? The stakes were enormous. He had worked with Elon before on satellite tracking systems, but nothing this important, nothing with this kind of pressure. He knew that the technology he had developed had worked for smaller, local applications, but this was different. This was the stuff of interplanetary travel. "You're asking me to work on the Mars mission satellite tracking?" Ethan asked, trying to steady his voice. Elon met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan. We believe you have the skills to solve this problem, and we need your creativity. You've proven that you can think outside the box. We need that kind of thinking to ensure our mission to Mars is a success." The weight of his words hit Ethan all at once. This wasn't just about making another breakthrough. This was about something that could change the course of history. SpaceX was planning to send humans to Mars, and it was up to Ethan to make sure they could keep track of everything along the way. Of course, Ethan said, standing up straighter. I'll do whatever it takes. But I'll need access to the most recent satellite data, and I'll want to work closely with the other engineers on the team to ensure we're all aligned on the technical specifications. Elon smiled. I expected nothing less from you, Ethan. You'll have everything you need. The entire team will be at your disposal. Ethan felt the gravity of the task settling on his shoulders, but instead of being overwhelmed, he felt a strange sense of excitement. This was his moment to prove that he was more than the mistakes of his past. He could handle this challenge. He had to. As the meeting concluded, the rest of the team filtered out, leaving Ethan and Maya alone with Elon. Maya shot him an encouraging glance, but he could see the concern in her eyes. This is huge, she said quietly. Are you sure you're ready for this? Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. I have to be. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the future. Elon stepped forward and clapped Ethan on the back. I believe in you, Ethan. You've got what it takes to make this work. And when you're ready, we'll need a presentation on your progress. Let's aim for a demo in the next 2 weeks. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. 2 weeks. That was barely enough time to scratch the surface of such a monumental task. I won't let you down, Ethan said with a determination he didn't quite feel yet. After Elon left, Maya remained by his side. 2 weeks? She asked, eyebrows raised. That's insane. But you've got this. We'll work together. Figure it out. You're not in this alone. Ethan nodded, grateful for her confidence in him. But the pressure was mounting. This was the challenge of a lifetime, and it was his responsibility to make sure it succeeded. The next few days were a blur of data analysis, long hours in the lab, and intense brainstorming sessions with Maya and the other engineers. The problem was more complex than he'd anticipated. There were glitches in the satellite's transmission paths, interference that couldn't be explained by normal atmospheric conditions. The more Ethan worked, the more he realized that the solution wasn't going to come from conventional methods. The technology was sound, but something else was interfering, something unexpected. Late one evening, after everyone else had left the office, Ethan stayed behind to run one last round of tests. As he analyzed the data, something clicked. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't interference from space weather or solar flares. It was a deliberate disruption, something that had been overlooked in the original designs. The issue wasn't with the satellites themselves, but with how the tracking algorithms were communicating with them. Ethan's heart raced as he reviewed his calculations. It was a simple fix. If he could adjust the way the algorithms process satellite signals, he could eliminate the errors. It wouldn't be easy, but it was doable. He immediately started making the changes to the system, refining the algorithms, and testing them against the real-time data feeds. As the hours passed, the results started to improve. The glitches were less frequent, the signal clearer. It was working. By the time Maya arrived at the office the next morning, Ethan was already deep into his work, running tests on the improved system. She stopped by his desk, her eyes widening as she saw the results on the screen. Ethan, this is incredible, she said, her voice full of awe. You actually did it. Ethan couldn't help but grin. I think so, but I won't know for sure until I can get it in front of the team. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ethan worked tirelessly to refine the system, making sure that it could handle the complexity of the Mars mission's satellite communications. Every test was more promising than the last. The errors were disappearing, and the satellite data was coming through with pinpoint accuracy. Finally, the day of the presentation arrived. Ethan stood in front of the team again, this time with an entirely different sense of confidence. He wasn't just presenting an idea anymore. He was presenting a solution that could change the course of space exploration. As he walked them through the data and explained the adjustments he'd made to the tracking algorithms, the team listened intently. Elon was there too, standing at the back of the room, his arms crossed, his eyes focused on Ethan. When the presentation concluded, there was a long silence. Well, Ethan, Elon said, stepping forward with a smile, it looks like you've done it again. The team erupted into applause, and for the first time, Ethan felt a rush of pride. He wasn't just the kid who made a mistake in court anymore. He was someone who had overcome obstacles, learned from his failures, and delivered a breakthrough that could change the future of space travel. The weight of the past was still there, but now it felt manageable. It wasn't about erasing his mistakes. It was about using them to propel himself forward. As Ethan left the room, Maya caught up with him, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it, Ethan. I knew you could." Ethan looked at her, grateful beyond words. "I couldn't have done it without you. You were there every step of the way." Maya's smile widened. "You did the hard work. Now, the whole world is going to see what you're capable of." And for the first time, Ethan believed her. The days following Ethan's breakthrough were a blur of excitement, validation, and relentless work. The tracking system he had developed was now fully integrated into SpaceX's mission to Mars, and it was performing better than anyone could have anticipated. The satellite feeds were reliable, the data streaming in without interruptions. But even as the project moved forward smoothly, something deep inside Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He had been riding high on the success of his work, and everyone around him seemed to recognize his abilities. Elon had even praised him in front of the team, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he was truly being seen. But despite all the progress, a nagging doubt kept creeping into his thoughts. There was something he was missing, a hidden complication that had yet to be revealed. It was late one evening when the first sign of trouble appeared. Ethan had been reviewing some of the satellite's secondary data points, just to ensure everything was running smoothly. But as he examined the readings more closely, he noticed something strange, an anomaly in the transmission patterns. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A distortion that didn't match the usual background interference. Curious, he ran another series of tests, this time focusing on the areas where the distortion was most noticeable. The data came back inconclusive, but the anomaly was undeniable. It wasn't a typical glitch. This was something more deliberate, more sophisticated. Ethan's mind raced. Could someone be tampering with the system? He had worked too hard to let something like this jeopardize everything. But who would want to sabotage the Mars mission? And why now, when everything seemed to be going so smoothly? His first instinct was to call Maya, but it was late, and he didn't want to bother her. Instead, he decided to dig deeper on his own. The more he worked, the clearer it became. The distortion wasn't just an error in the system, it was a pattern. Someone, or something, was actively interfering with the data feeds. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his next move. He couldn't just ignore this. If the Mars mission was at risk, the consequences could be catastrophic. But what if he was wrong? What if this was just another false alarm, another minor glitch in an incredibly complex system? He couldn't afford to make a mistake. With a deep breath, Ethan sent an encrypted message to Elon Musk, detailing the anomaly he had discovered and asking for his advice on how to proceed. The next morning, Elon called Ethan into his office. There was an intensity to his gaze that immediately told Ethan this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Ethan," Elon began, his voice calm but firm, "I've seen the message you sent. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you telling me that someone is actively interfering with the Mars mission's satellite data?" Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "It looks that way. I've reviewed the data multiple times, and it's not just a coincidence. Whoever is behind this knows exactly what they're doing." Elon leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "This is serious. If someone is sabotaging the mission, we can't afford to ignore it. But at the same time, I need you to be certain. This could be a major distraction, and we can't let it interfere with the timeline." Ethan's pulse quickened. "I'm sure, Elon. The pattern is too specific to be a glitch. I've seen enough in my time working with satellite systems to recognize when something is off." Elon stared at him for a moment, then sighed. "All right, we'll need to dig deeper. I'm going to have the security team look into it. But you need to stay focused on the work, Ethan. Don't let this consume you." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of what Elon was asking. But something told him that this wasn't just a minor issue. It was bigger than that. "Of course. I'll stay on track," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the unease he felt. "But I'll keep an eye on this. If there's something more to it, I won't back down until we find out what it is." Elon's gaze softened, just a little. I trust you, Ethan. You've proven yourself over and over. Now, let's focus on solving this. Over the next few days, Ethan kept his head down, continuing to work on the Mars mission satellite systems. But even as he threw himself into his tasks, the nagging sense of uncertainty refused to let go. Every time he ran the satellite's diagnostics, the anomaly was still there, just beneath the surface. Ethan wasn't the only one who noticed the strange pattern. A few of the engineers on the team started to pick up on it as well. They didn't have the same level of expertise in satellite systems as Ethan, but even they could see that something wasn't right. And as more people became aware of the issue, the atmosphere at SpaceX began to shift. What had once been a buzz of excitement and progress now felt charged with a quiet, unspoken tension. And then, late one night, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. Maya stood in the doorway of his office, her face pale. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "I think you need to see this." He followed her down the hall, his mind racing. What could it be? Had they found something new? Maya led him to a small conference room, where a large screen displayed the latest satellite data. Ethan's stomach dropped as he saw what she was pointing at. The anomaly wasn't just a subtle glitch anymore. It had grown stronger, more pronounced. And the signal wasn't just coming from the satellite system. "It's coming from somewhere else," Maya whispered, her face tight with worry. Ethan stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. This is coming from a secondary source, a relay node that's tied into the satellite network. But who would be messing with that? Maya hesitated, then said what they were both thinking. This isn't just interference. This is sabotage. Someone is actively manipulating the data. Ethan's mind was spinning. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. They weren't just dealing with a technical glitch. There was an outside force at play, someone with enough knowledge to disrupt one of the most critical systems in the world's most advanced space program. Who would do this? Ethan murmured, his thoughts racing. Maya shook her head. "I don't know. But whoever it is, they're good. Really good." Ethan took a deep breath. "We need to get this to Elon. He needs to know what's happening before it's too late." As Maya and Ethan made their way back to Elon's office, the weight of the situation pressed down on them both. They had no idea who was behind the sabotage or why they were doing it, but one thing was clear. They had to stop it before it sabotaged everything they had worked for. And Ethan had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger challenge, one that might go far beyond the Mars mission. As Ethan stepped into Elon's office, he could feel the tension in the air. Whatever was happening, they were about to face the kind of challenge that would test not just their technology, but their ability to trust one another. Elon looked up at him, his face serious. "What's the situation?" Ethan swallowed hard. "We're dealing with something much bigger than a glitch. Someone's tampering with the data, actively trying to sabotage the mission. We need to find out who's behind this, and fast." Elon nodded slowly. "I'll make sure the team is on it. We'll get to the bottom of this." But even as he spoke, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were in way over their heads. Something darker was at play, something neither he nor SpaceX had seen coming. And if they didn't act quickly, it might be too late to stop it. The following days were a whirlwind of activity at SpaceX. Security protocols were tightened, the engineers worked overtime, and Elon assembled a special task force to investigate the source of the sabotage. But despite their best efforts, the culprits remained elusive. Ethan couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread as each day passed without a breakthrough. The interference in the satellite data was growing more sophisticated. Whoever was behind it had not only gained access to the communication systems, but seemed to have embedded themselves deep within the infrastructure. It was a silent, invisible hand that had already infiltrated SpaceX's operations, someone who knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Ethan's thoughts were consumed by the mystery. Late at night, after everyone had left the office, he found himself standing in front of the whiteboard in the lab, furiously scribbling down his theories. The sabotage had been too precise, too well executed. Whoever was responsible wasn't acting alone. There had to be a network of people involved, perhaps even within SpaceX itself. But who could it be? Who within the company would have the knowledge, the skill, and the motive to derail a mission as important as the Mars mission? A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Maya stepped inside. her face tense. "Ethan," she said, her voice low. "I think I found something. You need to see this." Ethan followed her to the small conference room. On the screen, Maya pulled up an encrypted message that had been flagged by one of the security team's algorithms. The message was short, but the implications were enormous. "I've seen this before," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the same encryption used by a hacker group known as Spectre. They've been on the radar of cybersecurity agencies for years." Maya nodded. "I had a feeling." The message was disguised as routine maintenance information, but after running some tests, I found traces of Spectre's signature code embedded in the data packets. Ethan's mind raced. Spectre was a notorious group of elite hackers, known for infiltrating high-profile organizations with the precision of a surgeon. They had never been caught, and their motives were unclear. Some said they were political activists, others claimed they were in it for the challenge. But whatever the reason, their involvement in this was a game-changer. Why would Spectre be targeting SpaceX? Ethan asked, feeling the weight of the question pressed down on him. "That's the million-dollar question," Maya replied. "But if they're involved, it means this isn't just about disrupting a satellite. This could be about something much bigger. Maybe they're trying to undermine the entire Mars mission, maybe even the entire space program." Ethan's heart sank. The gravity of the situation had just multiplied. It wasn't just a rogue element within the company or a disgruntled employee. This was an external force, a group with the expertise and resources to bring down SpaceX from the inside out. "How do we stop them?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with urgency. "We're going to need help," Maya said, her tone resolute. "We can't take on Spectre alone. They're too powerful. We'll need to reach out to external cybersecurity experts, and I mean the best. People who know how to track these guys down." Ethan nodded, his mind racing through possible solutions. But deep down, he knew that this wasn't just a technical problem anymore. It was a battle of wits, and Spectre was playing to win. The next day, Elon called a meeting with the core team to discuss the situation. Ethan stood beside Maya, trying to steady his nerves as he prepared to present his findings. The room was tense, everyone acutely aware of the stakes. "Elon," Maya began, "we've traced the sabotage back to an encrypted message that we believe is linked to Spectre, a highly skilled hacker group. They've been involved in previous cyber attacks on government and private sector organizations, and their methods are incredibly sophisticated." Elon's face darkened as he processed the information. "Are you telling me that a group of hackers has infiltrated SpaceX, and they're targeting our Mars mission?" Ethan nodded. "That's what we believe, and from what we've seen, they've embedded themselves deep within our systems. It's not just about sabotaging the satellites. We're talking about a full-scale disruption of our operations, and they know exactly what they're doing." Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "This is far worse than I thought. Spectre is dangerous. If they're after us, we need to act quickly. We can't afford to let them derail our plans for Mars." "What's the next move?" asked one of the engineers, his voice shaking with the realization of how serious the situation had become. "We bring in the experts," Elon said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I want a team of external cybersecurity professionals working with us around the clock. We'll also implement a complete security overhaul. Nobody gets access to anything without my approval, and I want everyone to stay vigilant." Maya and Ethan exchanged glances. It was clear that SpaceX wasn't just facing a technical issue anymore. This was a war, and Spectre was playing for keeps. That night, as Ethan sat at his desk, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The entire mission to Mars was at risk, and there was little they could do to stop it. Spectre had infiltrated their systems in a way that was nearly undetectable, and each step they took to stop it seemed to lead them further down a rabbit hole. But there was one thing Ethan hadn't considered yet: the human element. Could there be someone within SpaceX who was working with Spectre? Someone on the inside? He had been so focused on the technology, on the data, that he hadn't stopped to think about the possibility of an insider. Could someone with access to the system be deliberately leaking information to Spectre? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "We need to talk. Urgent. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He stood up, grabbing his jacket as he headed out of the office. Maya's message had an edge to it, something that told him this wasn't just about the hacking group anymore. There was more to this than met the eye. When Ethan arrived at Maya's office, she was already there, pacing back and forth. "I think I found something," Maya said, her voice urgent. "I went back through the logs and security footage, and I've spotted something strange. It's a person, someone who's been accessing restricted areas without clearance." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Who?" "That's what I'm still working on," Maya said, her brow furrowed. "But I think this person might be working with Spectre, and they're using their access to feed information to the hackers." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. They were dealing with an insider, someone who had been right under their noses the entire time. As the investigation continued, the pieces slowly began to fall into place. The closer they got to uncovering the mole within SpaceX, the more dangerous the situation became. Ethan knew they were running out of time, and with each passing hour, the threat to the Mars mission grew more real. It was clear now that Spectre wasn't just a hacker group. They were a shadow, working in the dark to manipulate everything from the inside out. And someone at SpaceX was helping them. And as Ethan stared at the screen in front of him, one thought kept running through his mind. Who could they trust? The next few days felt like a slow-motion train wreck. The deeper Ethan and Maya dug into the security logs, the more unsettling the situation became. Their investigation into the encrypted Spectre messages had revealed a pattern, one that traced back to an internal source. The mole inside SpaceX, the one feeding information to Spectre, was far more skilled than they had imagined. This wasn't just some rogue employee. They were up against someone with intimate knowledge of SpaceX's inner workings. And worse, they were hiding in plain sight. Ethan sat at his desk, his mind spinning. The feeling of betrayal gnawed at him. SpaceX wasn't just a company to him. It was a place where the future was being written. The idea that someone inside was willing to sabotage everything for their own reasons was unthinkable. He had spent so much of his time focusing on the technical side of things, the satellites, the coding, the numbers, that he had missed the human element. The one thing that might bring it all down. Maya walked in, her face etched with exhaustion but also determination. "Ethan, we've narrowed it down," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "The person we're looking for has been in the system since the early stages of the Mars project. We believe they've been working in a senior position, possibly someone in communications or system security. But their movements are covered so well, it's almost like they knew the exact places to hide." Ethan's stomach churned. "Could it be someone close to Elon?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. If the mole was close to Elon, this could be far more dangerous than they had realized. "We're not sure yet," Maya replied, pacing as she spoke, "but we have a few leads. The key will be identifying who has had access to the systems in question and where their movements intersect with the interference we've been seeing. We need to dig into security logs, but we also need to be careful. If the mole gets wind of what we're doing, they'll cover their tracks even better." Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to focus. The idea of an insider was like a dark cloud hanging over him. He had always believed in the integrity of the people at SpaceX, but now, as the pieces fell together, he couldn't ignore the truth. This sabotage wasn't just a random act of destruction. It was calculated. Someone with a motive had been playing a long game. Who would want to bring down the Mars mission? Ethan muttered to himself, his mind racing through the list of potential suspects. And why target the satellite system specifically? Maya stopped pacing and turned to face him, her expression serious. "That's the question, isn't it? The satellite system is the backbone of the mission. If you cripple that, you cripple the entire operation. It's not just about money or politics. This feels personal." Ethan's mind flashed back to the early days of the project, to the excitement and the sense of purpose that had driven everyone involved. There had been so much hope. So many people were counting on the success of the Mars mission. But now, as the sabotage unfolded, it was clear that someone was trying to extinguish that hope. And whoever it was, they were prepared to do whatever it took. "Have you gone through the team's personal files?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "Maybe there's something in their backgrounds, Financial issues, political motives, something we're missing. Maya nodded. We've started that, but it's going to take time. I'm sure we'll find something. But for now, we need to focus on the immediate threat. If this person is still inside the organization, they could do more damage before we can even stop them. Later that evening, the team gathered for a high-level meeting to address the growing concerns. Elon had been briefed on the situation, and his face was as grim as Ethan had ever seen it. The weight of the crisis was settling on him, but his resolve remained unshaken. I don't need to remind you how important this mission is, Elon began, his voice steady. We're dealing with a sophisticated operation here. Someone within our own ranks is sabotaging the mission, and that's unacceptable. We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to do it fast. The team nodded in agreement, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Ethan glanced around the room at the faces of his colleagues. Could it be one of them? Someone who had earned their trust? Someone who had been in their midst the whole time? The thought made Ethan's stomach churn, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for doubt now. They had to act decisively. We'll be bringing in external investigators, Elon continued. But I need you all to be on high alert. No one leaves the premises without being checked. Every email, every communication is under review. And until we find out who's behind this, no one is safe from suspicion. Ethan exchanged a look with Maya. This was escalating fast. The atmosphere in the room felt thick, charged with suspicion. Every person in that room was now a potential suspect. It was a terrifying thought, but the urgency of the situation left little room for doubt. Elon, Maya spoke up, breaking the silence. We've traced the sabotage back to a person inside the company. They've been accessing secure systems and leaking information to an outside source. We're close, but we need to be more strategic. We can't let them get away with this. Elon's jaw tightened. I trust you to lead this, Maya. Ethan, I want you to work closely with her. I need you both to find this person before they can cause any more damage. Ethan nodded. Understood, Elon. We'll get to the bottom of this. The next few days were spent combing through layers of data, checking security footage, and tracking down every lead, no matter how small. But the more they dug, the more elusive the mole became. Whoever it was, they were good at covering their tracks. The team worked tirelessly, the pressure mounting with each passing hour. But then, just as Ethan was starting to feel the strain of the investigation, a breakthrough came. Maya had managed to isolate a single data packet, a transmission that had gone unnoticed in the chaos of the last few weeks. And within that packet, hidden in plain sight, was a name. It was the name of someone high up in SpaceX's communications department, a senior engineer who had been with the company since its early days. Someone who had worked closely with Elon on several key projects. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was the person they had been looking for. The mole. The insider who had been feeding Spectre information for months. I knew it, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was him all along. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. It was someone he had trusted, someone who had been a part of the team since the very beginning. But the question still lingered in his mind. Why? Why would someone so deeply embedded in SpaceX's success risk it all for a shadowy hacker group? What could they possibly gain from bringing down the Mars mission? As the pieces began to fall into place, Ethan knew they were about to face the most dangerous part of the investigation. The mole was still out there, and now that they knew who it was, the stakes had never been higher. They had to move quickly. The clock was ticking, and with each passing moment, it felt like they were getting closer to something much bigger. A conspiracy that stretched far beyond the sabotage of a single project. It was no longer just about the mission. It was about survival. The discovery that the mole was someone from within their own ranks sent a ripple of shock through SpaceX. Ethan and Maya had hoped that the sabotage could be traced back to a rogue outsider, someone with an agenda unrelated to the company. But the truth was much darker. One of their own had been orchestrating the disruptions from within, pulling strings behind the scenes for months. Ethan stared at the name on the screen in front of him, disbelief still settling in his mind. Marcus Yates. He was a senior systems engineer with decades of experience, a trusted member of the team, and someone who had been involved in several high-profile projects at SpaceX. To think that he could be the one responsible for sabotaging everything was unfathomable. I never would have suspected him, Maya said, her voice tight with frustration. Marcus was always one of the top performers, a go-to guy. He's worked alongside Elon on the Mars project for months. How could he have been feeding information to Spectre without anyone noticing? Ethan ran a hand through his hair. That's what doesn't make sense. If Marcus has been with us from the beginning, it's likely he knows everything about our systems, our weaknesses. But why would he betray the mission? What could he gain from taking us down? The silence that followed felt suffocating. They had crossed a line now. They weren't just dealing with a technical issue anymore. This was a personal betrayal, and they had to find answers. Answers that Marcus wasn't going to give up easily. We need to bring him in, Ethan said, his voice resolute. We confront him, get him to tell us what he knows. This has gone too far, but we need to be smart about this. We can't let him slip away. Maya nodded in agreement. I've already flagged his movements in the system. He's been accessing the main server rooms during off hours, and his security badge logs show some irregularities. We can't let him know we're onto him just yet. Ethan knew this wasn't going to be easy. Marcus was a seasoned engineer. He wouldn't just fold under pressure. He would be prepared for this kind of confrontation. Let's gather the team, Ethan said. We'll need backup, just in case. The team assembled in the security room, tension thick in the air. Elon was there, his expression dark and focused. The moment they had all been dreading had arrived. The confrontation with the man who had been leaking information to Spectre and undermining the mission from within. Elon, I'm afraid this is going to be a difficult conversation, Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with the weight of what was to come. Marcus Yates is the one who's been sabotaging the project. He's been working with Spectre all along. Elon's gaze hardened. I never thought it would come to this. Marcus has been with us since the early days. He's earned my trust, and I trusted him to help us get to Mars. This is a betrayal I never imagined. We're ready to confront him, Maya added. We have the evidence, but we need to catch him in the act. I've been tracking his movements, and he's scheduled to access the system again tonight. Elon stood up, his face filled with resolve. Then we act tonight. We can't let him continue this. We'll catch him in the act and put an end to it before he causes any more damage. As the evening descended into night, the team took their positions. They had set up a trap, a way to corner Marcus without him realizing they were onto him. Ethan, Maya, and a few security personnel would be stationed nearby, ready to intervene as soon as Marcus entered the server room. The hours dragged on. Every minute felt like an eternity. The quiet hum of the building around them seemed to amplify the tension that filled the air. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a dangerous game. Marcus wasn't just any suspect. He was a mastermind, someone who had been inside the company for years, and he knew how to cover his tracks. The door to the server room clicked open. Ethan's heart raced as he signaled to Maya. It was time. They moved swiftly, surrounding Marcus before he had a chance to react. His startled face was the first clue that he hadn't anticipated being caught. But despite the shock, there was no panic in his eyes. Just a cold, calculating look that made Ethan's skin crawl. Marcus, Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. We know what you've been doing. You've been leaking information to Spectre. It's over. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked. So, you've finally figured it out. You're a bit late, don't you think? Maya stepped forward. What do you want, Marcus? Why destroy everything we've worked for? The Mars mission, the future of humanity. What could possibly make you think this was worth it? Marcus chuckled softly, his eyes glinting with a mixture of arrogance and something darker. You think I'm doing this for money? Or revenge? You don't get it, do you? Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Then explain it to us. What's the real reason? Why sabotage something that could change the world? Marcus paused, his lips curling into a smile that sent a wave of unease through the room. It's never about the mission. It's about control. SpaceX is on the verge of something revolutionary. You're all so caught up in your idealistic dreams that you've forgotten one crucial thing. Power isn't just about building rockets. It's about who controls the future. And right now, that's not you. It's me. Ethan frowned, struggling to understand. What are you talking about? You've been working with Spectre all this time, leaking our plans to them. What do you gain from that? Marcus' smile widened, and for a moment, he seemed almost amused by their confusion. Spectre is only the beginning. They're the means to an end. You see, I've been pulling the strings from the inside. I've manipulated your systems, pushed you into the corner where you had no choice but to call for external help. They've helped me orchestrate the downfall of the mission. Maya stepped forward, her voice trembling with disbelief. But why? What's the endgame? What do you want? Marcus took a step back, his expression darkening. I'm not in it for the money or the fame. I'm in it for something much bigger. The future isn't about going to Mars. It's about who has the power to reshape humanity's destiny. And right now, I control that destiny. I've already secured the leverage I need. This mission, this company, it's just a stepping stone. Ethan's mind reeled as the weight of Marcus' words sank in. He had been playing a long game, manipulating SpaceX's trajectory for his own purposes. But what could someone like Marcus want from the future of humanity? What kind of power could he possibly wield? Before he could ask another question, Marcus smirked again. You'll never understand. But it doesn't matter anymore. The plan is already in motion. Nothing you do can stop it. As security escorted Marcus out of the room, Ethan stood frozen, trying to process the magnitude of what had just unfolded. The battle for the future of SpaceX, and possibly humanity, was far from over. And now, more than ever, Ethan realized that the real enemy wasn't just the hackers or the saboteurs. It was a dangerous mind, lurking within their own walls, controlling the fate of everything they held dear. Ethan looked at Maya, his voice barely above a whisper. What now? Maya met his gaze, her expression resolute. We stop the plan. Whatever Marcus is trying to set in motion, we have to stop it. And we have to do it fast. The stakes have just gotten higher. The following days were a blur of activity as the team scrambled to process the aftermath of Marcus' confession. He was no longer just a suspect. He was a criminal mastermind who had set in motion something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. His motives, though unclear, were becoming more and more troubling. The betrayal wasn't just an act of personal greed. It was something larger, more calculated. Ethan, Maya, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to piece together the web of connections Marcus had built with Spectre and any other parties he had been involved with. They knew this wasn't just a single rogue engineer. This was the tip of a much larger conspiracy. The thought kept echoing in Ethan's mind. What is Marcus planning? He sat at his desk, eyes scanning through encrypted files, but the data felt like a blur. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. There had to be a bigger picture that they couldn't yet see. Maya burst into his office, her face pale. Ethan, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he saw the contents. It was a message, sent by Marcus, detailing a set of coordinates. Along with the message, there was an encrypted document, a blueprint for something that didn't make sense. It wasn't just related to the Mars project. It was bigger. What the hell is this? Ethan muttered, scanning the coordinates and the schematic. Maya furrowed her brow. It's a plan for some kind of weaponized system, using the satellites that are supposed to be launching in the next few months. But this isn't just a communication network. This is something military. And the location? It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't about SpaceX's mission to Mars anymore. It wasn't even about the future of space exploration. Marcus had been using his position to hijack one of the most important pieces of technology in the world and repurpose it for something entirely different. They're going to weaponize the satellites, Ethan said, his voice growing louder with realization. That's the plan. And those coordinates, it's some kind of remote base or facility. Marcus has been using the satellite launches as a cover for this. We have to stop it, Maya replied, her voice strained. If Marcus has been working with Spectre, they'll use the satellites to disrupt global communications and launch a full-scale operation. This isn't just sabotage anymore. It's terrorism. Ethan stood up abruptly, shaking his head. We have to tell Elon. This goes beyond what we've been prepared for. The briefing with Elon was intense. The revelation that Marcus, along with Spectre, had been plotting to weaponize the very satellites designed to aid humanity's future was a devastating blow. But it wasn't just the satellites that were at risk. Elon understood the true scope of the danger. If Marcus and Spectre succeeded, they would have access to a global network of powerful technology that could be used to disrupt not just SpaceX's mission, but the entire infrastructure of communication, navigation, and defense worldwide. "We need to act now," Elon said, his voice steely with determination. "If Marcus has those coordinates and Spectre is involved, we're dealing with a massive operation. We can't afford to wait. If they launch this, it could take down entire systems, military, economic, and communication networks worldwide. We need to neutralize it before it's too late." Ethan could see the urgency in Elon's eyes. The weight of what was at stake settled heavily on his shoulders. The world was about to change in ways they hadn't anticipated, and if they didn't move quickly, the consequences could be catastrophic. "We've already traced some of the signals, and it's clear that Marcus has set up a network of false communications," Maya explained, her fingers flying over her tablet as she brought up the details. "He's made it so that any attempt to intercept or stop the launch could be masked or diverted. But we know where the facility is." Elon nodded, standing up. "Then we need to get a team on the ground. We're going to need all hands on deck. We can't trust anyone from within the company who might still be compromised. We'll need people from outside, someone who can't be infiltrated." Ethan's stomach twisted at the thought of leaving the company's fate in the hands of outsiders, but he understood the logic. If Marcus had infiltrated their ranks so thoroughly, they couldn't risk anyone from inside the organization being compromised further. "We'll get a special ops team," Ethan said, looking to Maya. "We'll need to move fast, and we'll need to know exactly how to disable the satellite network. If Marcus has built this weaponized system, we need to take it offline before it launches." The plan was set into motion almost immediately. Elon authorized a special task force to be sent to the remote location where Marcus had set up his operations. A team of military and cybersecurity experts was deployed, ready to infiltrate the facility and neutralize any threats. Ethan, Maya, and the rest of the internal team continued their work remotely, keeping track of every development. The atmosphere at SpaceX was tense, each moment feeling like a countdown to something catastrophic. Every minute that passed brought them closer to Marcus' final objective. The urgency of the situation was palpable, and there was no time to waste. Maya and Ethan worked side by side, digging through every possible piece of information they could uncover. They needed to understand how Marcus had designed the weaponized satellite system and how it could be shut down. Every solution felt temporary. Every plan had its flaws. "This doesn't make sense," Maya muttered, her eyes flicking between several data screens. "He's not just trying to disable the satellites. He's turning them into a network, a sort of global command center. He could use them to control everything: military systems, intelligence, even civilian networks." Ethan gritted his teeth. "So, what? He could start a war if he wanted to?" "That's the plan," Maya said grimly. "If Spectre has the resources to activate these satellites, they could have control of some of the most sensitive military operations worldwide. They would hold all the cards." Ethan took a deep breath. "Then we have to stop it." Hours later, they received word from the ground team. The facility had been located, and the operations had begun to breach the perimeter. But the real challenge was still ahead. The satellite network was set to go live within the next few hours, and if the team didn't succeed in disabling it in time, the world would be thrown into chaos. Ethan and Maya remained at their stations, their eyes fixed on the screens in front of them. The tension was unbearable. Each second felt like a countdown to disaster. Then, just as the first report came in from the ground team, a message popped up on Ethan's screen. It was an encrypted transmission, and the signature was unmistakable. It was from Marcus. The message was short, but chilling. "You'll never stop it. This is just the beginning. Welcome to the New World Order." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Marcus had anticipated their every move, even from his prison cell. This wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a battle for control of the future, one that could change everything. Ethan looked at Maya. "It's not over yet." Maya nodded, determination written on her face. "We've come too far to stop now. Let's finish this." And so, as the world teetered on the edge of a technological revolution or disaster, The final showdown for the fate of the Mars mission and humanity itself began. The team at SpaceX worked with an intensity that felt almost suffocating. Time was no longer on their side. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours, and the world outside SpaceX's walls continued spinning as if oblivious to the looming crisis. Ethan, Maya, and their colleagues had already dug into the heart of the operation, but there was something in the air now, a sense of inevitability that neither could shake. The task ahead was enormous, and the stakes monumental. The encrypted message from Marcus had sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Welcome to the New World Order. It was clear that he wasn't just playing a game of sabotage. He was working towards something far more dangerous, something that would irrevocably alter the power structures of the entire planet. Their team had just discovered the location of the control center for Marcus's weaponized satellite network. It was a facility deep within a remote island chain in the Pacific, a place that had no formal records of its existence and was concealed under layers of bureaucracy. But now they knew where it was, and now they had a mission. Stop Marcus, stop Spectre, and prevent global chaos from breaking out. Elon had given them a deadline, 48 hours. In that time, they had to disable the satellite network or risk a global shutdown of every major military, intelligence, and civilian infrastructure system. Ethan and Maya sat together in the command center, the data streaming across their screens. The task was daunting. The satellite system wasn't just a piece of tech, it was a global weapon. The satellites Marcus had repurposed could control communication systems, defense satellites, power grids, and transportation networks. The chaos that would ensue from such an attack could trigger a global war. Do you think we can stop it in time? Maya asked quietly, her fingers moving over the keyboard with precision. Ethan didn't immediately respond. He was too busy analyzing the data that was appearing on his own screen. He knew the task ahead of them was massive, but failure wasn't an option. We have to stop it, Maya, he said, his voice firm. The only thing we can do now is try. We can't afford to be second-guessing ourselves. We need to disrupt the link between the satellites and the facility Marcus has set up. If we can break the communication, we can take the network offline. They were in the midst of executing their plan, but even as they worked, doubts began to creep in. The encrypted signals they'd intercepted from Marcus suggested that his control of the satellite system was nearly complete. Their only hope was to infiltrate the remote facility, access the central control hub, and break the transmission before it became operational. At that very moment, a message from the task force came in. It was brief but urgent. We've reached the facility. We are engaging. No signs of Marcus, but security is tight. The clock is ticking. Ethan read the message twice. Time was running out. Let's hope they make it inside, Maya said, her voice low with concern. If they can't breach the inner defenses, we'll have to come up with another plan. But it's not looking good. As the clock continued ticking, the situation outside the facility became even more dire. The task force, led by an elite group of military operatives, had infiltrated the perimeter of the island, but Marcus had anticipated their move. The facility was more heavily guarded than they'd ever expected, with a complex set of countermeasures that seemed designed to keep out even the most prepared forces. The team inside had run into heavy resistance. The security systems were advanced, utilizing everything from biometric locks to remote detonated explosive devices. The closer they got to the core of the facility, the harder it became to navigate. They've got everything, the task force leader reported. Laser grids, encrypted communication lines, military-grade firewalls. We're in, but we haven't made it to the core yet. We're running out of time. As Ethan listened to the updates, his stomach churned. If the team couldn't get to the central control room in time, Marcus's satellites would go live. The only way to stop them was to disable the systems manually, but every second they lost meant the closer they were to global catastrophe. Maya turned to him. We need a backup plan. If the task force fails, what do we do? Ethan's mind raced. There had to be something they could do, something no one had thought of yet. Then, a cold realization hit him. Wait a second, he said. The satellites have a fail-safe mechanism, something that we've been overlooking. There's an emergency protocol built into the system. If the satellites go dark or lose their connection to the central system, they automatically go into a shutdown sequence. We need to trigger that fail-safe. Maya's eyes widened. You're right. But how are we going to do that? If we don't have direct access to the system, we don't need direct access, Ethan interrupted. We can trigger the failsafe remotely if we can get into their emergency command channel. Maya quickly began searching for the remote access point in the satellite's communication network. After a few moments, she looked up, her eyes shining with hope. I found it. The emergency command channel runs through a backup satellite. It's not secure, and it's not as well guarded as the main network. Ethan wasted no time. Good. Let's hack it. The next few minutes were the longest of Ethan's life. Maya worked relentlessly, her fingers a blur over the keyboard as she attempted to hack into the backup satellite's communication line. Every second felt like a lifetime. Ethan's eyes flicked between his screen and the clock. They had less than 20 minutes before Marcus's satellite system would be fully operational. And even if they managed to trigger the failsafe, there was no guarantee it would work. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice low but intense. I'm in. I've breached the emergency command channel. Now we just need to activate the shutdown sequence. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Do it. Now. Maya pressed the final key, her fingers shaking. The data on the screen flickered for a moment, then stilled. There was a beat of silence before the system confirmed the command. The satellites went dark. The emergency shutdown was a success, but the battle wasn't over. With the backup satellites offline, Marcus's control over the global network was temporarily halted. The task force on the ground had made it to the core of the facility just in time to disable the last layer of security. But even as they celebrated their small victory, they knew that Marcus wasn't going to give up. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Ethan stood before the command center screen, watching the data pour in. The satellites were down, but Marcus was still out there, and they knew he was planning something far more insidious. We can't stop now, Ethan said, looking at Maya. We've bought some time, but we need to finish this. We need to find Marcus before he can launch his next move. Maya nodded grimly. We'll track him down. We'll stop him, whatever it takes. And so, with the clock still ticking and the stakes higher than ever, the team knew that their fight was far from over. But one thing was clear. They weren't going to let Marcus and his dangerous ambitions destroy everything they had worked for. The final countdown was just beginning. The minutes dragged by like hours as the SpaceX team regrouped, their breaths still held from the tension of the emergency shutdown. The facility on the island was secure, the backup satellites were offline, and Marcus's master plan had been temporarily thwarted. But despite the victory, a nagging question loomed in the air. What next? The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, eyes fixed on the screen as Maya continued to input data, scanning for any sign that Marcus had already made his next move. The problem was that, despite their successes, they still didn't know the full scope of Marcus's operation or what he would try next. We've bought some time, Ethan said, breaking the silence. But we can't just sit here. Marcus is still out there. He's not the kind of guy to just disappear after a setback. Maya looked at him, her gaze sharp and focused. You're right. Marcus didn't go to all this trouble just to lose. If anything, he'll be more dangerous now that we've thwarted his first plan. He'll have contingencies. We need to think like him. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of computers and devices. Everyone was still processing the events of the past few hours, and the weight of their success, or lack thereof, hung heavily over them. Ethan stood up, pacing. We know he has resources. Spectre has access to things we can't even begin to imagine. If Marcus is behind all this, he could still have access to critical infrastructure, connections we haven't even identified yet. Maya nodded slowly. We need to go deeper. This wasn't just about controlling satellites. Marcus is part of something bigger, something global. We have to find out who he's working with, where he's getting his information from, and how far his network spreads. Exactly. Ethan's voice was tense, his frustration palpable. We thought it was just about taking down a rogue agent. But this is a full-scale operation, and we don't know the half of it. As the team continued to dig through their data, a small ping came through on one of the monitors. Maya froze, eyes locking onto the screen. The message was coded, a signature that looked vaguely familiar, but it was encrypted with a level of complexity that suggested it wasn't from Marcus directly. "Wait a second," she murmured, typing furiously to decrypt it. The seconds felt like an eternity. This isn't just any message. It's coming from Spectre. It's a list of orders, high-level directives. But there's something odd about it. Ethan rushed over to her side, his heart hammering in his chest. "What is it? What's in the message?" Maya's fingers flew over the keyboard. "I'm almost there. It's a list of locations, places where Marcus might be. But it's more than that. It's a plan for something else, something more dangerous." Ethan leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen as the message finally decrypted. His breath caught as he read the final line. "Project Phoenix." Maya met his gaze, her face pale. "That doesn't sound good." "Project Phoenix," Ethan repeated, his voice trailing off. He'd heard rumors of something like this before. An off-the-books project, something so secretive that even some of the highest-ranking officials at SpaceX had never heard of it. He had a sinking feeling in his gut that this was the real plan all along. "What's Project Phoenix?" Maya asked, her tone almost whispering. Ethan took a deep breath. "It's a fail-safe system, a contingency plan in case something went wrong with the satellite network. But it's not just about satellites anymore. Project Phoenix is designed to bring the entire global communication network to its knees. And we're not just talking about internet or cell phones. We're talking about military operations, national defense systems, and even energy grids." Maya's eyes widened. That's insane. He's not just trying to control information. He's trying to control everything." "Exactly," Ethan replied grimly. "And if we don't find out where he's activated this system, we're going to be facing an unprecedented global crisis. Everything will go offline. Air traffic, military communications, financial systems, everything." They looked at the screen, knowing time was running out again. The task force had made their way into the heart of Marcus's operation, but now it was clear that Marcus had one last trick up his sleeve, a system that could disable the world. Ethan had to act quickly. "We need to find out where this Project Phoenix is being initiated. I don't care how we do it, but we need to get ahead of Marcus before he hits the switch." The next few hours were spent in a frenzy of frantic searches, cross-checking data, and running algorithms. Every moment felt like a race against time. The world outside SpaceX's walls continued to turn, oblivious to the impending disaster. The location that Ethan and Maya finally pinpointed made their blood run cold. "It's a launch site," Maya said, her voice barely audible. "A hidden facility in the Arctic. That's where they're activating Project Phoenix." Ethan stared at the coordinates on the screen, his thoughts racing. "The Arctic? Why there?" "There's a reason for it," Maya explained, her fingers moving over the map. "It's remote. No one would look there. It's well beyond the range of most military surveillance, and any attempts to monitor it could be easily blocked. The perfect place for something like Project Phoenix to be activated." Ethan clenched his fists. The isolation of the Arctic wasn't just for security. It was a place where they could launch a system that would affect the entire world and make it nearly impossible to stop. No one would expect a global catastrophe to originate from a place so desolate. But he didn't have time to waste thinking about it. They had to get to that launch site before Marcus could execute the plan. The team had barely begun to mobilize when they received word from the task force. They had reached the heart of Marcus's facility, and they had found something that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Marcus wasn't there. He had vanished. But the Arctic facility was still on their radar. They were too close now to stop. "Let's go," Ethan said, his voice steady but urgent. "We're going to the Arctic." The mission to stop Project Phoenix began in earnest. The task force was already en route, prepared for the dangerous trek to the Arctic launch site. Meanwhile, Ethan, Maya, and the rest of the team were coordinating from SpaceX's command center. Every second felt like a countdown to global destruction. Ethan's phone buzzed, breaking through the tension. It was a message from Elon. "We're with you all the way. Keep pushing forward. The world is counting on you." Ethan put the phone down and turned to the team, his eyes steely with resolve. "We finish this," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "No matter what, we stop Marcus. We stop Spectre. And we protect everything we've built." And with that, They set their course for the Arctic, ready to face whatever lay ahead in their final, decisive confrontation with Marcus and the shadowy force that had orchestrated everything from the beginning. The journey to the Arctic was treacherous and grueling. As the team descended into the heart of the coldest and most desolate part of the world, the reality of their mission began to settle in. The vast, icy plains seemed to stretch endlessly, a reminder of just how isolated they were. It was the perfect place for someone like Marcus to operate without detection. Ethan sat at the head of the command center, staring at the satellite maps projected across the screens. They had identified the exact coordinates of the Arctic facility, but reaching it was going to be no easy task. The weather was brutal, with blizzards and freezing temperatures that would make any form of ground transport nearly impossible. Yet the team had no choice but to move forward. Maya leaned over his shoulder, her fingers tapping the table as the convoy's progress updated on her screen. "We'll be there in less than 4 hours, but the conditions are only getting worse. If we don't hurry, the storm could completely block us off from reaching the site." Ethan nodded, his face taut with concentration. "Then we push through. If Marcus is ahead of us, we can't afford to waste a second." The rest of the team was already gearing up for the mission on the ground. Equipped with the latest technology, they were ready to face the Arctic's harshest conditions. But despite their advanced gear, there was a sense of dread hanging over them. The Arctic was unforgiving, and if Marcus had really set up shop there, they were walking straight into the lion's den. "What's our extraction plan if things go sideways?" Maya asked, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "We don't have one," Ethan said bluntly, his eyes still glued to the screen. "We need to succeed here. No second chances." For hours later, the convoy arrived at a cliffside near the facility. The wind howled, snowflakes swirling in violent gusts. The team disembarked from their transport vehicles, their faces half covered with scarves and goggles to protect them from the biting cold. The Arctic facility was hidden beneath a ridge, its entrance camouflaged against the snow and ice. A few steps forward revealed a massive steel door embedded into the side of the mountain, its surface cold and unyielding. There were no visible signs of life. It was eerily quiet, with only the sound of wind swirling through the frozen landscape. "This is it," Maya said quietly, stepping up to the entrance. "Everything we've fought for is here." Ethan took a deep breath. "We go in fast and hard. No mistakes." They approached the door cautiously. With a swift motion, Maya entered a series of commands into her tablet, accessing the facility's security systems. The entrance didn't have a typical lock or access code. Instead, it was designed with high-tech biometric scanners. Maya's fingers flew over the device, hacking through layers of security. "We're in," she said, her voice sharp. "The door is opening." As the door creaked open, they were hit with a blast of warm air, an unsettling contrast to the frozen wasteland outside. Inside, the facility was massive, with high-tech servers and complex machinery humming beneath the surface. The air smelled sterile, like something out of a high-security research lab. They moved swiftly through the narrow halls, weapons at the ready. "This is it," Ethan said. "The heart of Project Phoenix. We can't let anything slip past us." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hall. Ethan's team immediately went on high alert, their weapons raised as they took cover behind a nearby pillar. The sound came from further down the corridor, where a series of red lights began to flash. "Trap," Maya whispered. "It's a diversion." Before Ethan could respond, a voice boomed over the facility's loudspeakers, cutting through the tense silence. Well, Ethan. You finally made it," Marcus's voice echoed, dripping with mockery. "I must admit, I didn't think you would get this far. But now that you're here, welcome to the end of the world." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the cold amusement in Marcus's tone. The man was playing with them, treating this like some sort of twisted game. "What are you doing, Marcus?" Ethan yelled back, his voice steady but furious. "This ends now." "Oh, Ethan," Marcus chuckled. "You're too late. Project Phoenix is already activated. The countdown has begun. Soon, the world will be on its knees, and I'll be the one calling the shots. But don't worry, you'll get to see it all unfold before it all ends." The screens in the room suddenly flickered to life, displaying a countdown timer that was steadily ticking down. Maya cursed under her breath. We have less than an hour. Ethan's mind raced. They had no time to waste. Project Phoenix had already begun its final sequence, and if they didn't disable it now, the consequences would be catastrophic. Move, Ethan ordered, his voice sharp. We have to reach the core. Let's go. The team sprinted down the hallway, guns drawn, their breath visible in the icy air of the facility. They had to navigate through tight security measures, evading automated turrets and armed guards as they went deeper into the facility. It was a gauntlet of high-tech defenses, each more dangerous than the last. We need to find the command center, Maya said. That's where the shutdown sequence is located. If we can access the mainframe, we can override the system. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. We're not letting Marcus win. Not after everything we've sacrificed. Minutes turned to what felt like hours as the team fought their way closer to the facility's heart. The countdown continued to tick down, the seconds slipping away. At last, they reached the command center, a vast, high-tech room with towering screens and rows of terminals. Marcus was waiting for them, his figure silhouetted against the glowing holographic interfaces. He stood with his arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. I knew you'd come, Ethan, Marcus said, his voice oozing with satisfaction. But it's too late. I've already initiated the launch. You can't stop it now. Ethan's eyes locked onto Marcus, his pulse quickening. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after everything they'd been through. You're wrong, Marcus, Ethan said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of your downfall. The team rushed forward, and within seconds, the room erupted in chaos. Gunfire rang out, echoing off the cold walls. As the team fought to subdue Marcus's guards, Maya sprinted to the nearest terminal, her fingers moving like lightning as she hacked into the mainframe. The countdown was now at 5 minutes. I'm in, Maya said, her voice taut with concentration. I'm trying to override the system, but it's locked. I need more time. Marcus laughed, his voice mocking. It's too late. You can't stop it. The world is mine. Ethan's gaze never left Marcus. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. With a final, desperate surge of energy, Maya broke through the encryption, her screen flashing green. I did it, she exclaimed, shutting down Project Phoenix. The countdown stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the room erupted in cheers from the team. The countdown had stopped, and Project Phoenix had been deactivated. But the war was far from over. Marcus snarled, his face twisted with fury. You think this is over? This is just the beginning. I'll come for you. All of you. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes cold. You've lost, Marcus. You'll never get away with this. And with that, Marcus was taken into custody. His plans had been foiled. But as Ethan watched him being escorted away, he knew this was far from the end. The world had been saved, but the true battle was just beginning. As the team made their way back to their extraction point, Ethan looked at the vast, frozen wilderness surrounding them. The battle for the future was far from over, but at least, for now, they had one. And they would keep fighting, no matter what it took. The Arctic winds howled as Ethan and his team boarded the transport vehicles that would take them back to civilization. The icy landscape, so quiet and still moments ago, now felt strangely oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The mission had been a success. Marcus's plans had been thwarted, Project Phoenix was deactivated, and the world was safe, for now. But as the team made their way back to the command center, the weight of their victory felt strangely hollow. Ethan sat in the back of the transport, his thoughts swirling. His mind replayed the chaotic moments inside the facility, the countdown, the shootout, Marcus's smug confidence, and then the relief when Maya had cracked the code and stopped the system. But despite the triumph, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of something much bigger. Maya sat across from him, her face tired but resolute. That was too close, she said, her voice low. Ethan nodded, rubbing his temples. Too close indeed, but we stopped him, and that's what matters. But for how long? Maya's question hung in the air, a reminder of the bigger picture. Marcus may be locked up, but what about the people he was working with? There's a bigger network at play here. We barely understand how deep this goes. Ethan didn't answer right away. He had the same thought. Marcus was one player in a much larger game. The technology behind Project Phoenix, the scale of the operation, the resources at his disposal. It wasn't something Marcus could have done alone. The world had always been interconnected, but it was clear now that someone with the right access, the right people, and the right technology could bring it all to its knees. And even with Marcus defeated, that threat wasn't gone. "We'll need to dig deeper," Ethan finally said, looking up at Maya. "We can't stop now. This battle's over, but the war isn't. We've got to figure out who else is behind all this. Who was really pulling the strings?" Maya's gaze darkened. "I've been thinking about that. There's a reason Project Phoenix was set up. It wasn't just about power. It was about control. Control of the world's communication networks, control of global infrastructure. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to topple governments. They were trying to control the very systems that make the world run." Ethan clenched his jaw. "That's exactly why we can't rest. Marcus was just the front. Someone else is orchestrating this, and they're out there somewhere." When they returned to SpaceX's headquarters, a tense silence filled the command center. The once chaotic operations had now calmed, but the uneasy feeling still lingered. Ethan walked in, leading his team, and was immediately greeted by a round of applause from the staff. Despite the victory, there was an air of solemnity to it. This wasn't the time to celebrate. It was time to regroup. Elon Musk, ever the enigmatic leader, was already there, awaiting them. His face was stern, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes as he saw the team walk in. Ethan knew Elon had always been involved in the bigger picture, but he also knew that this mission had changed everything. The stakes had been raised. "Well done," Elon said, his voice measured. "You saved the world, Ethan. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Ethan met his gaze, understanding the unspoken message. "What's next?" "Next?" Elon leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together thoughtfully. "Next, we figure out who was really behind Marcus. I've had my people looking into his connections. He was a pawn, a decoy to divert attention from the real players. We've barely touched the surface of what they're capable of, and I have a feeling that whoever they are, they're already planning their next move." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling back on his shoulders. "Then let's get to work." Over the following days, the team began their investigation in earnest. The intelligence gathered from Marcus's files had already provided some leads, but there was still a vast web of connections they needed to untangle. Ethan, Maya, and the team worked tirelessly, combing through encrypted communications, satellite data, and financial records in an attempt to pinpoint the true masterminds behind Project Phoenix. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the findings became. It wasn't just one rogue group. They were facing a global network of powerful entities, some with connections to governments, corporations, and military organizations. This was no longer about a single mission. It was about an intricate, coordinated effort to reshape the world's balance of power. At the same time, reports continued to trickle in from around the globe. Despite Project Phoenix being deactivated, there were still signs of disruption. Systems that had been compromised in the past weeks were slow to recover. Trust in international communications was at an all-time low, and the financial markets were still reeling from the brief collapse they'd endured. As the team sifted through this new information, they stumbled upon something that sent a chill down their spines. There was a name, the Black Network, repeated over and over in the data they had recovered. It was linked to high-level cyber attacks, espionage, and a network of corporations and governments that had secretly funded Marcus's operation. The Black Network was a shadow organization, an underground empire that controlled some of the most powerful systems in the world. "This is bigger than we thought," Maya said, her voice thick with disbelief as she scanned the data on her screen. "The Black Network isn't just about tech. It's about wealth, influence, and power. They've infiltrated everything, from the military-industrial complex to global banking systems." Ethan's mind raced as he processed this information. They were never interested in just taking down SpaceX or any other single entity. They wanted control of everything, every nation, every sector. They're playing a game on a global scale. Maya's fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard. I've been tracking their movements. They're already planning their next move. And I'm afraid it's going to be even bigger than Project Phoenix. Ethan clenched his fists. We can't let that happen. Weeks passed as the team continued their investigation. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous and widespread the Black Network's reach became. They had to act fast, but each move they made seemed to open new doors to even darker corners of the global stage. Elon Musk called an emergency meeting with the team, his face grim. We've reached a point where it's no longer just about preventing the next attack. We're up against a force that has infiltrated global systems on a scale we've never seen before. We need to expose them before they can strike again. Ethan stood up, his resolve solidifying. We need to take them down. But to do that, we need to know who's at the top. We need to get inside their operation. Elon looked at him, his expression unreadable. You're asking for a dangerous mission. They won't go down without a fight. But you've already proved you're capable of pulling off the impossible. Ethan nodded. Then let's finish what we started. As they prepared for the next phase of their operation, one thing became clear. The battle for control wasn't over. And as much as they defeated Marcus and his twisted plans, the real enemy was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And Ethan knew, deep down, that it wasn't just about saving the world anymore. It was about the days following the discovery of the Black Network's involvement were filled with tension. The world, though blissfully unaware of the depth of the threat they faced, was on the brink of a new kind of warfare, one that didn't rely on bombs or bullets, but on control, manipulation, and the silent takeover of everything that made the modern world function. Governments, businesses, and private entities had been infiltrated, compromised, or, in many cases, bought. Now, it was up to Ethan and his team to piece together the remaining fragments of information and strike before the Black Network could enact their grand plan. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the Black Network wasn't just an isolated threat. It was a shadow network, with fingers in nearly every major organization, from defense contractors to global financial institutions. Their plan was simple: to destabilize the global economy and political systems and then present themselves as the solution to rebuild the world in their image. The network's reach extended into every corner of the globe. Corporate giants, secret government projects, and military-industrial complexes had been co-opted to serve the Black Network's hidden agenda. Ethan had never been more aware of the scale of their challenge, but he also knew that time was running out. The Black Network was no longer operating in the shadows. They were making moves, laying the groundwork for their final assault. Each day that passed without a counterattack meant another step toward disaster. The team had been working around the clock to track down key players within the Black Network. Their efforts were often met with dead ends or false leads, but they had one breakthrough that gave them hope: a list of names linked to the organization's highest ranks. One name stood out among the rest: a man known only as Lucius. No one knew who he really was or where he came from, but his influence stretched across the globe, and it was believed that he was the mastermind behind the Black Network's operations. Lucius, Maya muttered as she stared at the file on her screen. We've been chasing shadows for weeks, and now we have a face. We just need to find him. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the data. The more he looked at the connections between Lucius and the various global players, the more he realized how deeply embedded the Black Network was in the world's infrastructure. This guy's untouchable, Ethan said, shaking his head. He's not just hiding in plain sight. He's built the very systems that are supposed to stop people like him. Maya looked up, her expression tense. If we're going to find him, we'll need to get closer to the people who work with him. We need leverage. The team began drafting a plan to infiltrate one of the Black Network's front organizations, an influential think tank that had been publicly aligned with humanitarian causes but secretly funded by some of the world's most powerful figures. The think tank was a perfect cover for Lucius and his network. It gave them access to political leaders, diplomats, and corporate executives, exactly the kind of people who could help them execute their plan. But infiltrating such a high-level operation wasn't going to be easy. It required precision, skill, and the ability to move undetected. This was a job for Ethan's team, but it also meant facing risks that could destroy everything they had worked for. "Here's the plan," Ethan said, standing before the team in the war room. The mood was serious. No jokes, no distractions. This was it. The think tank is hosting a gala next week. It's a high-profile event, with leaders from all over the world attending. If Lucius is going to show himself, it'll be then. We need someone inside. Maya, you're our hacker. Get us into their systems, find the data we need. You'll have access to their internal communications and sensitive files. Maya nodded, her eyes sharp with focus. I'll be ready. Ben, you're going to handle our cover identities. You're the best at this. We need to blend in. Make sure no one even suspects we're there for anything other than to rub elbows with the right people. Ben, the team's expert in disguise and infiltration, gave a wry smile. Understood. I'll have our background solid by the time we step through the door. And I'll be on the inside, Ethan continued. We need to get close to the top people at that gala, especially those with ties to Lucius. I don't care if we have to go through the back door. We're getting the intel we need. The team went over the plan several times, making adjustments and contingencies for every possible scenario. As they finalized the details, the weight of the mission began to sink in. They weren't just going to a gala. They were walking into the lion's den, and they would need every ounce of their skills to make it out alive. The night of the gala arrived faster than Ethan had expected. The venue was a grand ballroom, the kind of place where the world's wealthiest and most influential people gathered. The lights glittered from massive chandeliers, and the sound of soft jazz filled the air, masking the tense atmosphere beneath the surface. The team was dressed to blend in, each person assuming their cover identity. Maya had her tech in hand, disguised as a high-profile cybersecurity consultant, while Ben looked every bit the charming socialite, ready to mingle with the elite. Ethan had a more straightforward cover. He was there as a consultant on a high-tech infrastructure project, a plausible background given his connections to SpaceX. As they entered the ballroom, Ethan's heart rate quickened. Every face in the crowd could potentially be an ally or an enemy. They had to move carefully, blending in while staying alert for any signs of Lucius or his operatives. The gala was the perfect setting for the Black Network to operate. The mingling of so many powerful people created an environment ripe for manipulation, for alliances, and for deals that could shape the world. Ethan could feel the weight of those unspoken negotiations in the air. Maya gave him a nod as she slipped away to the back of the room, where a group of tech executives were discussing the future of digital communications. Ethan stayed by the bar, scanning the crowd for any familiar faces, those with connections to Lucius. It wasn't long before he spotted something that caught his attention. At the far end of the room, a group of high-ranking diplomats and corporate CEOs stood gathered, laughing and chatting with an older man who had the air of someone used to command. His dark hair was neatly styled, and he wore a tailored suit that fit perfectly, projecting an image of someone who belonged at the top. Ethan's instincts flared. This man had the presence of someone who knew how to make things happen. If Lucius wasn't here, this man was definitely someone worth following. Ethan took a deep breath and moved toward the group, ready to introduce himself. As he approached, a voice at his shoulder made him pause. "You're looking for Lucius, aren't you?" Ethan turned, his heart skipping a beat. A woman stood behind him, tall and composed, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through him. She wore a sleek black dress and a quiet confidence that suggested she wasn't someone to be underestimated. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice low, cautious. She smiled, a subtle but knowing smile. "I'm someone who knows who you are, Ethan, and I know what you're doing here." The realization hit him in an instant. She was no ordinary guest at this gala. She was connected to the Black Network, and whatever game she was playing, Ethan was now a part of it. "We need to talk," she said, her voice smooth and inviting, yet laced with danger. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed her into the shadows of the ballroom, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him. The Black Network had just made its move, and the game was about to change forever. The woman led Ethan into a quiet alcove near the back of the ballroom, away from the murmurs of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses. Her movements were graceful, confident, as if she was accustomed to being the center of attention in rooms like this. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together who she might be. Every instinct told him that she wasn't just another player in this tangled web. She was important, powerful. When they were out of earshot of the crowd, the woman turned to face him. Her eyes, cold and calculating, met his with an intensity that could make anyone second-guess their next move. "You must be wondering who I am," she said, her voice calm but with an edge that suggested she wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Ethan crossed his arms, keeping a wary distance. "I have some ideas, but it'd be a lot easier if you just told me." A slight smile tugged at her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Cassandra, and I've been watching you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Cassandra. The name rang in his head like an alarm bell. He had heard rumors about a high-ranking member of the Black Network, a woman who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings in a way that made even the most powerful men uneasy. But he hadn't expected to meet her tonight, let alone under such tense circumstances. "Watching me?" Ethan echoed, his voice tight. "I wasn't aware I was so interesting." "Oh, you're more interesting than you think," Cassandra replied smoothly. "You've been a thorn in our side ever since you started digging into Project Phoenix. But I'm not here to fight you, Ethan. Quite the opposite, actually." Ethan took a step back, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "What do you mean, not here to fight me?" "I'm offering you a chance," Cassandra continued, her tone almost patronizing in its calmness. "A chance to work with us. You're already deep in the web, Ethan. You might as well see how far it goes. We can help you, and in return, you can help us accomplish our goals." Ethan frowned. "And what exactly are your goals?" Cassandra's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Control. We don't just want power. We want to shape the future. What the Black Network is doing isn't just about money or resources. It's about creating a new world order, one where everything is under our control. The technology, the people, the systems, it's all part of the plan." Her words were chilling, but Ethan had heard enough to understand the scope of their intentions. They didn't want to just destabilize nations or gain influence over corporations. They wanted to control the very fabric of the modern world. Everything that made society function would be under their command. "I'm not interested in your plans, Cassandra," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "I'm here to stop you." Her smile faltered, just for a moment, before it returned with a more knowing look. "You've heard the name Lucius, haven't you?" Ethan's heart skipped again. He had known this was coming. He had to stay focused. "What about him?" Cassandra leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Lucius is the one you should be worried about. He's not just the mastermind behind the Black Network. He's the architect of the new world. He has visions for humanity that are beyond what you can imagine." Ethan's mind was racing. "And you're working for him?" "In a sense," Cassandra replied, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not here because I trust Lucius. I'm here because I know what he's capable of. What the Black Network is building. It's too powerful to be stopped by conventional means. But you, Ethan, you're different. You've seen how the world works, and you've fought against it. You understand the stakes. That's why I'm offering you the opportunity to join us." Ethan felt a cold rage building inside him. The way she spoke about Lucius, like he was some kind of messiah, like he was the solution to all the world's problems, was infuriating. But more than that, it was a reminder of the stakes they were up against. This wasn't just about stopping a single organization. This was about a vision of the future, one that Ethan couldn't let happen. "I don't work for people like you," Ethan spat. "I'll stop Lucius, and I'll stop you too." Cassandra's smile didn't fade, but there was something else in her eyes now, something colder. "That's the problem, Ethan. You think you're fighting us, but you don't even understand the game we're playing. Lucius doesn't just want control. He wants to evolve humanity itself. And if you're not careful, you'll be swept away by the tide." Ethan clenched his fists, his anger rising. "I'll never be a part of your vision." She took a step closer to him, her voice low but insistent. "I think you will, eventually. Everyone does." Before he could respond, Cassandra turned away, vanishing into the crowd of guests, leaving Ethan standing in the alcove, the weight of her words lingering in the air. He had been offered a choice: work with the Black Network or fight against it. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was no choice at all. He couldn't let Lucius and his vision become a reality. There was too much at stake, and even though it seemed like a battle that could never be won, he had to keep fighting. Back at the table, the team had gathered again, ready to regroup after their respective missions. Maya and Ben arrived soon after, their faces grim. Ethan noticed the tension in their eyes as they all sat down. "So, what did you find?" Maya asked, her voice steady but sharp. Ethan hesitated for a moment, replaying his conversation with Cassandra in his mind. It was clear she had been trying to manipulate him, to get him to question everything he'd fought for. But he couldn't afford to let her words get to him. "She offered me a deal," he said slowly. "She wants me to join them, help them achieve their goals. But I turned her down." Ben raised an eyebrow. "You sure that was the right call?" Ethan stared at him. "I'm not going to work for people like them. We need to stop Lucius, not join him." Maya nodded. "I agree. But she's right about one thing. This is bigger than we thought. Lucius has a vision that goes beyond anything we've encountered." "We'll deal with that later," Ethan said firmly. "First, we need to find out how to take him down. We can't let him control the future." The team shared a moment of silence, the gravity of their situation settling in. It wasn't just about defeating one man or one group. It was about saving the future from being molded by people like Lucius. And no matter how impossible the task seemed, Ethan was ready to take that fight to the next level. Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking the city, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy, risks, and the weight of the coming battle. The decision to reject Cassandra's offer hadn't been an easy one, but he knew it was the only choice. If the Black Network's plan succeeded, the world would be unrecognizable. People would be nothing more than pawns in a game controlled by Lucius and his hidden hand. He couldn't let that happen, not on his watch. The night air was cold, and the lights of the city below twinkled like stars, seemingly oblivious to the chaos brewing beneath the surface. It was strange to think that, as much as the world kept turning, a few people like him could change everything. But that was the reality now. He had to stop Lucius. Inside the safe house, Maya and Ben were preparing for the final phase of their mission, infiltrating the Black Network's main headquarters and taking down Lucius before he could carry out the full extent of his plan. The information they had gathered from the gala and their previous covert operations pointed to one location, a high-security facility in the Swiss Alps, a place so isolated and fortified that it seemed like a fortress built for the future. They had no time to waste. "Maya, are you ready?" Ethan asked, turning to face her. She was hunched over her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she hacked into the Black Network systems for the final time. The air around her was tense with focus, and Ethan could see the determination in her eyes. "I've got the blueprints," she replied, not looking up. "I've already breached their firewalls. We'll have access to everything once we're inside, but getting past their defenses won't be easy. We'll have to move fast." Ben, sitting on the couch across the room, adjusted his disguise kit and checked his weapons. "We've been through worse. We'll get in, take out Lucius, and get out. Simple." Ethan smiled at Ben's usual confidence, but the truth was, this mission was anything but simple. The Black Network wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a massive operation with global reach, and Lucius wasn't some two-bit villain. He was a mastermind who had planned for every possible scenario. Ethan could feel the weight of their task bearing down on him. "Let's do this," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "We go in, neutralize their operations, and make sure Lucius never gets the chance to complete his plan." The team geared up in silence. Each person had their role, and there was no room for mistakes. The mission had already cost them too much, and they weren't about to let it all fall apart now. The journey to the Swiss Alps was long and grueling, but they had come prepared. Infiltrating the remote facility required a combination of skill and precision, two things that Ethan's team was known for. They had studied the terrain, the security systems, and the personnel stationed there for weeks. Nothing was left to chance. They arrived at the edge of the facility in the dead of night, their stealth transport landing just outside the heavily guarded perimeter. Maya had already bypassed the outer security, using a backdoor to disable the surveillance systems temporarily. It was now or never. Ethan led the way as the team moved through the snow-covered landscape, keeping to the shadows, their movements swift and silent. Every step brought them closer to their objective, Lucius. As they approached the main building, they could see the heavily fortified structure looming ahead. Armed guards patrolled the area, their rifles at the ready. But Ethan had already planned their route, using a combination of gadgets and careful timing to avoid detection. They moved through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the snow, until they reached the building's entrance. Maya quickly disabled the last security system, and they slipped inside without a sound. The inside of the facility was colder than they expected, the sterile white walls and high-tech security systems making the place feel more like a military bunker than an office. Every corner was equipped with cameras, motion sensors, and alarms. The tension in the air was palpable as the team moved cautiously through the hallways. "We're in," Maya whispered, her eyes scanning the screen on her wrist that tracked their location in the building. "Lucius is on the top floor. That's where we need to go." The elevator to the top floor was guarded, but Ben had already taken care of that, knocking out the guards with precise efficiency. They moved quickly, taking the elevator to the highest level of the building. When the doors opened, they found themselves in front of a set of massive, reinforced doors. The top floor was an entirely different world from the lower levels, more lavish, more sophisticated. But Ethan's focus remained on one thing, Lucius. "He's in there," Maya said, her voice low but certain. Ethan nodded, turning to Ben. "We're going in." Ben pushed the doors open, and they stepped into a large, dimly lit office. The room was expansive, with panoramic windows that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountains. But the view was the last thing on Ethan's mind. He was focused on the man standing in the center of the room, looking out over the snow-covered landscape. "Lucius." He turned slowly, his face calm and collected, almost serene. He was tall, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to see through everything. His tailored suit and quiet confidence made him look more like a corporate CEO than the leader of a global criminal network. But Ethan knew better. This man had orchestrated everything, and he was the one they had to stop. "So, you finally made it," Lucius said, his voice smooth and composed, as if he were greeting old friends instead of enemies. "I've been expecting you." "You knew we were coming?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Lucius smiled. "Of course. You've been a thorn in my side for far too long. I couldn't let you go on thinking you were in control." Maya's fingers hovered over the control panel of her wrist device, ready to shut down the facility's power. "It's over, Lucius. We're not letting you get away with this." Lucius's smile didn't waver. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about control. It's about the future. The world as it is cannot continue. You're fighting a battle against something that will change everything, and you will lose. The network is already too powerful. The only question is whether you'll join me, or if you'll be left behind." Ethan took a step forward, his resolve solidifying. Not a chance. He reached for his gun, but before he could make a move, Lucius raised a hand, and the room's lights flickered. The wall seemed to shift, revealing hidden compartments and high-tech weapon systems. The entire room had been a trap. Maya acted quickly, hacking into the system to disable the facility's lockdown, but it was too late. Guards flooded into the room, and the final showdown began. The battle was fierce. Ethan and his team fought with everything they had, but Lucius's forces were highly trained and well-armed. They were in the lion's den now, and every second mattered. But in the chaos, Ethan realized something. Lucius wasn't just trying to control the world. He was trying to reshape it, and in doing so, he had lost touch with humanity itself. It wasn't the power he craved. It was something far more dangerous. He wanted to build a world where people like him ruled without challenge, a world where freedom was an illusion. In the end, it was Ethan who made the decisive move. He cornered Lucius in a narrow hallway, their guns aimed at each other. The tension in the air was thick, and Lucius's calm demeanor finally cracked. "You think you can stop me?" Lucius sneered. Ethan's voice was steady, resolute. "I don't have to stop you. The people will, and they'll do it without you." And with that, Ethan pulled the trigger, ending the man who had tried to control everything. As the facility crumbled around them, the team made their escape. The Black Network had been dismantled, but the fight for the future had only just begun. Ethan knew that they had won a major battle, but there were more challenges ahead. But one thing was certain. No one would ever control the world like Lucius had planned. And together, they would make sure of it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?